I call to order the Lakewood City Council and Lakewood Reinvestment Authority joint study session in the city of Lakewood, Colorado on September 16th, 2019 at 7 p.m. in council chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Gutwein.
Here.
Skilling. Here. LeBure.
Here.
Abel. Here. Vincent.
Here.
Vida.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Harrison.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Well, this is a big night, one that will start a process of three additional meetings, or 2 additional meetings plus this. This is budget time, and we have a lot of great information to go through. 600-page book that Mr. Dorr will not take us all the way through, but a lot of great slides, and we'll hear from, I think, every department tonight or something along those lines, or hear about every department tonight. So, without further ado, Mr. Dorr's favorite night of the year, or one of 3 favorite nights, welcome. No CU buffs tonight.
No. Unfortunately, that Air Force
Took it out of you.
really put up a good game, and kudos to them for that. So not tonight. Thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. Once again, Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director and City Treasurer. Well, it's officially the last week of summer, and with fall approaching, it's time for the City of Lakewood's annual budget study session. Because this is the 50th anniversary of the city's incorporation, this will be the 50th budget of the City of Lakewood as well. And I felt that this would be a good time for us to just take a moment and sort of look back upon our history as a city from a budget perspective. And I keep in my office a copy of the original 1970 budget for the City of Lakewood. And I'm going to ask Madam Clerk to hand this up to the dais. And I think each of you will enjoy just spending a couple of seconds flipping through it. It's 17 sheets of paper. It's 15 pages in total. You'll see, I'll give you a few highlights of it. You can just flip through it. But the municipal court's budget was $24,000. The Parks and Recreation Department budget was $169,000. The Police Department budget was $816,000. And that's notable because now the Police Department budget is $1.1 million per week. Per week. So think about that. Also, the capital budget was $450,000 in total for the entire city of Lakewood. And I don't want to pick upon my predecessors at all in any way, but page 15 in the capital budget has the one typo as well in the budget. And you'll see they described patrol cars, comma, market. And I think they meant marked. But there's no narrative necessarily. There aren't any pictures. There's no message from the, well, then it would have been city administrator and not city manager. So I think that kind of gives us all a real flavor for how Lakewood has changed over the last 50 years and likely how it will change in the next 50 years. Indeed, there are many who believe that the world is in now our 4th industrial revolution. First being, of course, steam, then electricity and computers, but now we have this confluence of artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, quantum computing, 3D printing, 5G data transmission, and other technologies that'll transform the world. So think about the next 50 years, and we'll spend the rest of the evening talking about the future. But hopefully that gives us all a little perspective coming into really this budget study session. And Mayor, as you pointed out, this document, which is online and has been there since September 6th, many call this a moral document, others a policy document. I'm a CPA, so I think of it just in financial terms, really. But of course, I understand what it means to the community and to all of you and our various departments in their mission in meeting your core community values. So for tonight, before we dive in, I just want to tell you where we've been already. You know, many months have gone into the preparation of this budget, culminating with our study session tonight. And of course, we still have a couple of steps ahead, as the mayor pointed out. But I do want to tell you that our Budget and Audit Board has previewed this budget and all of its assumptions and projections. That was done on August 19th. And the Budget and Audit Board is comprised of 3 citizens chosen by council, and also 3 council members, Beta, Harrison, and they are chaired by Council Member LeBure. And so they've taken a look at that. Tonight we'll have our study session, and then as the mayor just mentioned, we'll have 2 public hearings, 2 opportunities for the public to have a look at all the details, share their thoughts in the public forum, and really help shape the direction of the budget as it carries forward. As I mentioned, this has been on the internet, on the lakewood.org website since September 6th. And of course, council has had their budget documents as well since then. So just to kind of give you a little idea of our agenda for tonight, and this will feel similar, yet there are some differences. There are a few little twists along the way for those of you with lots of experience. But I will first give a background and orientation. We should keep in mind that we have 5 candidates for office, and you can all think back, I'm sure, to when you first considered running for office at City of Lakewood, Colorado, and what it was like to see the budget and the budget process for the first time. We do use some jargon, some slang, some lingo as we go along. I'm going to try to do as little of that as possible, so I'll give a little background. And then we're going to talk about revenue forecast and proposed spending in the coming budget. And as the mayor mentioned, really 80+% of what we do is in 3 main departments: our police department, public works, and community resources. So we will have my colleagues, Chief Dan McCaskey, Mr. Jay Hutchison, Director of Public Works, and Ms. Kit Newland, Director of Community Resources. They'll update you on projects completed, in progress, and those planned for the future. And then we have a new item. Actually, we're bringing this back. Last year it was contingent upon an election, but we also have a Tabor budget, and each of the 3 departments will cover that. And of course, it's covered in the book, and we have details in the slides. Of course, we'll be available for discussion, questions, and answers. But Mayor, as you pointed out, we do need to adjourn the Lakewood City Council at one point and have we need to convene the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. This is a joint meeting, but we need to really shift gears, and we have a presentation from our executive director of the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, Mr. Robert Smith. So he will come to the podium as well. So I opened by saying that this is a policy document, it's a moral document. Everything that we do as a city should be connected to council's core community values. And I talked about all of those sort of big picture or sort of lofty ideas. Maybe they're even academic in some regard. So the next layer down is to get into somewhat of the nitty gritty. And for the city of Lakewood, we can control our expenditures. All the appropriations are decided by city council. Nobody else. I don't have the authority to make any appropriations. Neither does anybody else sitting behind me here. So the spending is, of course, controlled by city council. But before we can do that, we've got to estimate our income, because then we know the amount of resources we have available and what services we can and can't provide for. We can do anything, but we can't do everything. One of my colleagues is famous for coining that phrase. And so first we have to estimate our income and know what our resources will be, and I'll talk about that. So that's sort of the first step. And what are our sources of income, and how are they trending, and so forth. And as I often say, the city of Lakewood is sort of like a self-employed household. We can't control that income as much as in a salaried household situation we might be able to do. So, of course, we'll prioritize our expenses, and they fall into 2 categories, programs and personnel, and then, of course, our capital projects and construction. You're going to hear lots about both. And then hopefully there's a favorable difference between revenues and expenditures, and the city can save for a rainy day or a hailstorm day, as the case may have been in the past a number of years for the Lakewood community. And I'll talk a little bit about how our reserve funds are doing, and then I'll talk a little bit about the trend relative to the city of Lakewood's peers across the Front Range and in the metro area. All of our budgeting is done by fund. And I'm going to use the word fund, I don't know how many times today, and even my colleagues will use the expression or the word fund. And we have a definition of it in our glossary of terms. in the back of the book if you'd like a real technical explanation. But generally, really, a fund is just a collection of accounts. It's just a segregation of accounts or a list of records based on the purpose of the given source of funds and the expenditure. So our general fund is just that. It's general. We can spend on any lawful municipal purpose. But the rest of the city's funds are restricted. Our open space fund can only be spent on open space type activities. And there are many other examples. And there's a listing of the city's funds in the book on page 96. And so again, a fund is just a collection of revenues and expenses organized for a specific purpose. But I'm really excited about this yellow arrow that's about to come up. Dramatic pause. We have a new fund at the city of Lakewood for the first time only the second time in my 18-year career, and that's the Tabor Fund. Now, we're proposing it. Only council can create the fund, and that will be done in the adoption of the budget in October. So it's not yet formally established, but obviously it's going to meet the needs of the community and the election, 2D, from this past November. So it's exciting to have a new fund. If you look at the history of the spending as it's projected in the book, you don't see much from the prior years. But for us, accountants, that's really exciting. It's a whole new set of books and records, and we think that the ongoing activities in the Tabor Fund will probably carry on for a number of years. So it makes sense to segregate that. And if you want more detail on what's going on the Tabor Fund, you can have a look at page 117, and then also the city manager's budget message on pages 26 and 27 really provides some great details, not only on the Tabor Fund itself, but on the activities related to Tabor and how much the city will retain and how much the city has refunded. And it's a pretty close balance between the two. I found that to be really striking. So we talk about our income. We want to, I'm now using the expression fund, but when you look at the revenues of the city, really the general fund is nearly twice as large as all of the other funds put together. And so we end up spending a lot of time talking about the general fund because it's also where a lot of the decisions and a lot of the engagement occurs, and that's in the general fund. In our golf fund, it's a pretty well-established business. There aren't a whole lot of new decisions to make, so we don't talk about it as much at the budget study session, but we're happy, of course, to answer any questions related to that. So then the income within the general fund breaks down as you see here. Let me first go straight to other, because that's the first thing I look at when I see a big number that isn't descriptive. None of the items in other would amount to 1%. It's things like interest income. The city's reserves earn interest. They are invested in safe and secure investments that earn interest. That's credited to the general fund. We have court fines. That's blended into this other. Cigarette taxes and other generally smaller sources of income. Our intergovernmental revenue is quite large. We collect county road and bridge. We collect gasoline taxes, highway users trust fund revenues. So intergovernmental revenue, very large. Franchise fees, also big. We provide a franchise. We have provided a franchise, the city has, under an agreement with Xcel Energy and Comcast, so that those companies can use community land in order to conduct their businesses, and as such, a franchise fee is collected. It's a very large source. Of course, property tax. Everybody understands that. Everybody's familiar with it. If you own real property, either commercial or residential, you pay a property tax. That's a very large source of income. And then also, and finally, not finally, but also charges for services, 9.3%. So these are recreation center revenues, license fees, things like that. And then last but most is the sales and use tax. And that's where I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking. And I want to tell you, there's a bit of an evolution, or maybe a revolution afoot in terms of how consumer behavior and some changes in the landscape are impacting our revenues. It's something that I'm watching very carefully and talking to my colleagues about and trying to really understand as we engage with the business community. And just as we talk to consumers on the street and think about each of us in our own households and how we're spending money and how the sales tax revenue could be changing in the future. But before I talk about sales and use tax, I ought to talk about what it is. First of all, Any exchange of tangible property that happens in the city for money is subject to the city's sales tax. So yet, when you purchase something, you pay a 7.5% sales tax, and that's not just the city of Lakewood, but also includes these other governments, Jefferson County, the state, Regional Transportation District, and the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. They also have a sales tax and are part of the total purchase. But any tangible good that's subject to the sales tax, not everything is, 3% sales tax, and that is how we provide services to the Lakewood community, all of them. Law enforcement and public safety, transportation, parks and recreation, our judicial services, all of those things are touched by the sales tax. With the exception, I suppose, of our enterprises, things like our water fund and our sewer fund, things like that. So what do we do first in terms of estimating the income, this sales tax? Consumer sales tax consumption varies, depending on consumer tastes, based on consumer incomes and a lot of different factors. So there are a lot of things to take into consideration. First thing is we have data and information on the Lakewood economy, not just from driving around, but in our sales tax database. We know what is new and up and coming. We know businesses that are struggling. We look at those trends. And I'm going to share more information with you this year, Council, than I have in the past, because I think it's a little bit more germane to this change that's happening in consumer behavior. So you're going to see some charts and graphs you haven't seen before in terms of the industries that contribute to the sales tax, how they're doing, some of the geography around sales tax, what that means, and how it's driving this change. So first, let me walk you around. This is the Spring Hill Suites Marriott out at the Colorado Mills. That's a real exciting opening because it will drive foot traffic and it will drive visitors, we believe, to the Colorado Mills. And we all need that, as you'll see in a moment. So this is a very nice property. Under construction in the lower left, and this is really sort of a dichotomy. This is the real diversity that's happening in the Lakewood economy. Lower left is just north of 6th Avenue at Sheridan, just west of Sheridan, obviously, inside Lakewood. And this is manufacturing and warehouse space that's happening there. If you're traveling west on 6th, if you look off to the right, to the north, you'll see this is some very meaningful construction that's just, I think this shot is just weeks old, quite honestly. So it's nice to see steel coming out of the ground and the construction workers on site. Not so good, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this. This is down in Grant Ranch at Wadsworth, below 285. And this is the former Babies R Us store. And the company has gone liquidated and closed for a lot of different reasons. And I'm going to talk about those in a minute. We also have the Sears that's closed on West Colfax, and no sense belaboring it with a bunch of pictures, but we do have other businesses as well that are closed in the community. And so that gives pause and time for thought. And so here are some of those new slides that you may not have seen before. You might wonder, and you should know, which industries make up the dollar of sales tax that we collect as a city. And we have this information, and we're going to show a little bit of it tonight we hadn't shown in the past. So first, let me just orient you to the pie chart here, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So first, all of these numbers are for July year to date, because the July sales taxes are paid to City Hall on August 20th. It's September 16th. This is the latest information. After September 20th, I'll have the August year-to-date numbers, and you'd be able to see those. But I can tell you that these industries, and of course I'm going to talk about all other, because right away you're looking at 43.6%, thinking, what the heck is that, right? But if you look at this for first quarter, second quarter, fourth quarter, these numbers don't change too much. This is really sort of the action that's happening out in the community. And I'm just going to start with really the biggest industry is the blue one there in the upper right, which is restaurant. And that's something we all see because we're all eating out for occasions, holidays, whatever, business meetings, whatever the case may be with our families. And we see the restaurants and we see how they're moving. Department stores, 10%. And I think the rest of the slices are fairly self-explanatory with the exception of all other. And I want to tell you that all other includes a very large, it's really everything else is a better way for me to put it. There are things in there. I won't read this whole list, but I'm going to read a number of them. Country clubs, nail salons, bowling alleys, cosmetic stores, hobby stores, pet supplies, liquor stores, florists, tire dealers, beauty salons, etc. There are just a number in there. And also what everybody believes to be the online retailers, right? The online businesses, companies like Amazon, of course, because they sell things in all of these other areas, and some of their friendly peers who sell online only. And there'd be other companies in there like Costco.com. There isn't a Costco located in Lakewood, but you can go online and buy something and have it delivered. To me, that's an online retailer, and it's in the all other. So there's some art to this, as much as there is some science, because many of these retailers, particularly the super centers, they sell home improvement goods. We all know that, so that can kind of muddy the waters a little bit. But we've taken our best effort to show you where's the money coming from. But this is where it gets really interesting, to my mind. Here's how they're doing. Here's how they're all doing. So we're out in the restaurants, and yeah, sales have increased. People are feeling pretty good. They're out spending a little bit. Department stores, okay. Power utilities, but not so great with the super centers. And really, that's two companies. You probably can guess who they are, but I'll tell you, Target and Walmart. They're the super centers. Telecommunications, those are your Verizon Wireless, your T-Mobile, your CenturyLink, those kinds of folks. Electronics retail, that's your Best Buy. Those are also your cell phone and technology stores. So when you go to a brick and mortar T-Mobile, that's separate from the bill, the telecommunications service that you get. That's in the other pie. Home improvement, I think we all know what those are. Grocery, even though the city of Lakewood does not tax groceries, they're obviously very large retailers that make up 3% of our sales tax economy, and they sell other things that are subject to the sales tax, shoelaces, light bulbs, batteries, all kinds of other tangible goods. So it's a large industry. And then new car dealerships, I've segregated that out because, frankly, when you go for service, you have to think all the parts that are happening. We have very large dealerships in Lakewood, very large dealerships, and every time they sell an oil filter, a windshield wiper, a fan belt, whatever it might be in the car, that's a big industry, 3.2% of our sales tax economy, and you can kind of see how that's going July year to date. And then I'm just going to add one more layer of detail and show you, I'm just adding on to the existing information. I'm going to show you some geography here. So you see that year to date, let me just first say, sales tax revenues increased 0.9%. That's not hot. That's below last year at this time. We were, over 3% year to date. And so that represents $340,453. But then if you look at the geography, I think you'll also find this interesting. First, I should tell you that the city has 11,000 licensed businesses in our database. 11,000. They got to file a sales tax return. We know the information. They don't all pay on time, believe it or not, but we work with them, and we get our tax revenues collected. But half of them are inside the city and half of them are outside the city. So naturally we want to know how the outside the city, how they're doing. They comprise 26.8% of the revenues. And they're doing well, as you can see, year to date, 7%. Let me give you a few examples of out of city businesses, okay? Because they make up different types, all right? First, there is a Lazy Boy Furniture down at Yale and Wadsworth. That's in Denver. You probably know that. But if you go into Lazy Boy Furniture, rare is the case that you grab the Lazy Boy and put it in, the Honda Civic and take it home. You don't do that. You tend to have it delivered, right? It just won't fit in the family car. Most of the time it's delivered. But if you live in Lakewood, the tangible property was exchanged in Lakewood, and therefore the sales tax is due. And of course, Lazy Boy has been licensed with the city, since day one, since the minute they open. And so they calculate all the deliveries that occur in Lakewood, and they collect the sales tax, and they remit it to City Hall every month. Very easy. right? They're located out of the city. Most of the time you go to Lazy Boy, but more and more people are going to lazyboy.com and ordering furniture and having it delivered. So it's out of city, and it's prospering and doing really well. Other examples would include Netflix. Right? They're not based in Lakewood, but you're having that telecommunication exchange. Comcast, Dell. I mentioned Costco.com. Of course, Sam's Club's got a .com too. You can go online, order. They're out of the city, but they have it delivered, and they collect a sales tax. Xcel Energy is not located in the city. Their corporate headquarters and offices and their management and all that are located out of the city, so they're outside of the city. Toyota leasing, I think, is another good example. So if you lease a car from BMW, General Motors, any other car company, and you make that monthly lease payment, you pay sales tax on that. And but the leasing company is based, many of these leasing companies are based outside of the state of Colorado. So we want to know how they're doing. CenturyLink, I might have mentioned, T-Mobile, etc. So we really want to understand how those businesses are doing, because they tend to project more often the greater economy, right? Because larger businesses have a greater diversity of services. Okay, Colfax Corridor, you can read these as I just go down. Colorado Mills, that number feels good, but there's a little more to it. I'll show you that in a minute. But it's obviously the largest single sales tax location in the city of Lakewood. It has always been that way since the day it opened. It's just such a very large footprint, nothing like it. Grant Ranch, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I've sort of got a new love for the area, and I'm very curious about it, and I'll show it to you in a little bit more detail in a minute. But it's a very large trade area. Grant Ranch makes up 5% of the sales tax dollar. That's a large number, and it's not doing well, as you see. Alameda Corridor, Denver West, you see Belmar here. And then I did segregate the online retailers. These are household names that you know. It's really just a handful, really. Dell Computer, Apple Computer, anything that had a .com in it, like Costco.com or SamsClub.com, those kinds of things. And of course, the big one, Amazon. And you see how it's going for those people. And I think that's another little part of the story I'll share with you here in a minute. And then lastly, Fairfield Commons. And if you don't know where that is, that's at First and Wadsworth on the east side of Wadsworth. It's the home of our Sprouts here in Lakewood. And it's a fairly large sales tax generating property. So good for us to keep tabs on. And so we're gonna kind of continue to have a look at the geography of things. These 4 articles are less than a month old. I shared these with the Budget and Audit Board, and I'll read off some of the fine print there. It's not quite showing up really well, but cord cutting is going up. Cord cutting reminds me of last decade when everybody got rid of the home phone line. How many people have a home phone line? There are a few. Don't raise your hands. You're fine. You're fine. I get it. You got to do it. But fewer and fewer people have the home phone line, and it is now estimated, this article is in Forbes, it's estimated that nearly 1/3 of cable customers will have cut the cord by the end of next year. That's a big deal, because not only is that service subject to sales tax at 3%, it's also subject to a franchise fee at 5%. So that's a big deal when you start estimating income for a 2020 general fund budget, okay? Lowe's is laying off workers. You see that. Sales, are having some headwinds. And then I tried to put it here, but Samsung smartphones down 8%. Apple smartphones were down 12%. And what you've got going there is none of us are really excited about the next generation of tablets and mobile phones and things like that. So those sales are down, and not surprising a whole lot of people. Okay, I mentioned the Grant Ranch trade area, and I want to talk a little bit about it because I think it illustrates what's going on with online and how that's impacting the city of Lakewood. First, let me step back and say that the vision for Lakewood and its financial sustainability for at least the last 30 years that I can tell, maybe 40 years, but for sure 30, is that the city has worked very hard as a community, quite frankly, to have destination retail. What destination retail means is you're motivated to get in your car, mostly, and drive to that retail because it's special and it gives you an experience and it gives you the opportunity to buy something that you really, really want. And to the credit of all of those people involved in that for those 30, 40 years, they won. Because the city has for a long time drawn many, many people who don't live in Lakewood to this retail destination shopping. I can't prove that with absolutely the best evidence in the world, but I think we all generally have an idea that Colorado Mills is a destination. Belmar has some events like Festival Italiano that are very, very special. They draw people. And also our transportation corridors and our borders lend themselves to people coming to Lakewood as a destination. They really do. And I think this Grant Ranch trade area is, I'm just fascinated with it and how it really kind of tells the story. So think of people getting in their cars and driving to retail destinations. That's sort of the old model. The new model of the last 9 months, to be real frank with you, in a very accelerated fashion, is people pulling out their phones while they're probably moving. Shame on them, right? But we're working on that. And they order something and it comes to the house. So people who used to come to Lakewood as a destination to do retail shopping are now having it come to their house. You say, so what? We've got a lot of people here. They used to buy it at REI, and now they just buy it gets delivered to their house. Yes, that is absolutely happening. And in this Grant Ranch trade area, keep in mind, the sales tax from this Grant Ranch trade area is twice that of Belmar, just to give you an idea. Twice the sales tax revenue than Belmar, so to the general fund. So we have Pep Boys, Office Max. You see here vacant the former Babies R Us. You have Lowe's, you have Ulta, Home Goods, Michael's, American Furniture Warehouse, off Broadway, Vitamin. By the way, above the Vitamin shop, all along Wadsworth there on the east side, that's just a restaurant row there that'll just bring every culinary satisfaction to you there. It's very robust. You see Best Buy, REI. You see a portion there that's not shaded. That's Kaiser Permanente. They are not in the city of Lakewood. And then you see Whole Foods. So very productive trade area. It's at the full 3% rate of sales tax. Belmar being at 1%. I should point that out. That's a big part of it. But you think, well, that REI, that Best Buy, people buy online. What's the big deal? I think this is the big deal. This trade area, which you see here in the yellow, it's surrounded by what? Not Lakewood in a lot of cases, right? It's surrounded by unincorporated Jefferson County, which is that entire area that isn't shaded. All right. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of households and homes. I did this, I talked about this in a ward meeting one night, and a person said to me, but Larry, the person bought those shoes from REI just because they live in Jefferson County. What's that mean? I said, well, there's an REI in Fort Collins, there's an REI in Denver, there's an REI in Lone Tree. Their REI is they're Boulder, they're Dillon, they're all over the state. But when the goods are handed off to you at your house or left on your porch, that's where the transaction takes place. That's where the sales tax takes place. So if you see that yellow area, by the way, the green is Denver, you see Beaumar, you see Littleton. The upper right, sort of funky looking green, if I can say it that way, is Englewood, and Sheridan is right below it, and you see Columbine Valley. So, there are a lot of people who used to drive to REI to buy that $500 canoe or whatever. By the way, I can tell you the average transaction is very high in this trade area. Think about, those barbecue grills, those snow blowers at Lowe's. Think about American Furniture Warehouse. Things are expensive, and things are expensive at REI too, right? But I had a person it was very difficult to understand, well, if I live in that unincorporated Jefferson County area, it shouldn't matter because I bought it from REI. It's in Lakewood. But when you buy it online, it's delivered. Anything you buy and have delivered. It's based on where your home is, or if you have it delivered to your business, that's a different story. So I'm trying to get Lakewood workers to have their stuff delivered here so we can collect the sales tax. We're happy to do that. Used to be a nuisance, but now it's generating some sales tax, quite frankly. So think about this trade area, and then think about the Sheridan corridor. Think about the Union corridor with 6th Avenue. Think about Colorado Mills and Colfax and I-70 and 6. Think about those, and you start to think that Lakewood used to have this foot traffic, this destination, this importing of sales trade activity, and now with the unincorporated areas or people, not visiting, that's a challenge. That's a headwind. So thank you for your attention to that, and I'm happy to answer any questions either now or as we get through to the finish about what all of that means. Now, you did see that the sales tax revenue had increased for Colorado Mills. And that is true. You see that here. These are the 4 years running for July year to date, and you see quite an increase there, almost $400,000 in revenue, and that's a meaningful percent. You also see that it's significantly below 2016 year to date, which is before the hailstorm. And frankly, if you take all of those gaps and then you take them to December 31st, it's 5.8 million, and that's a big number. That's a big number, and it would appear to me, just in estimating, that it could be 3 to 4 years before Colorado Mills probably reaches its 2016 level, which is a big gap. Think about the idea, not only 3,769,000, but there likely would have been some inflationary growth on that as well. At the same time, a lot of reasons to be bullish. You saw earlier this year that the Under Armour store has opened. That's an entirely new retailer to the city of Lakewood. That's very exciting. And there have been a couple of other openings there as well. So we're hopeful. And also, obviously, Colorado Mills Mall is exciting and refreshed and all of that, as it has been for a while. So the first thing in estimating our income is what's going on in Lakewood. And as you can tell, we've got good information. We've got lots of information. Some of it is conclusive, others maybe not so much. But we have an idea of what's going on, and we're looking at that very, very carefully at a number of different levels. We don't employ any professional economists at the city of Lakewood. We don't pay any consultants and so forth to do economic forecasting, but we do have a couple of really good resources in the governor's office and the Colorado Legislative Council. They are due to release their third quarter report this week. It was not released as of this morning, but you can see what these two agencies are feeling for sales tax collections at the state level. Now, the state's fiscal year ends June 30th, so that's why you see 2019, 2020, 2021. So we can't quite mirror that exactly, but we have these economic forecasts, and it talks not only about in-migration into the state, but about a lot of different economic factors that go into it, including the retail industry. So we're able to look at that as well and make hopefully our best forecast, which I will tell you is more conservative than this for 2020. And that's been our history, is kind of looking at what's going on at the state and then choosing a more conservative course of action. In addition, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk just a little bit about property taxes, and this is a reassessment year. The county assessor is just hard at work, and we are anxiously awaiting the reassessment number at the city, which we'll get, unfortunately, after the budget is adopted. We usually get that in mid-November. Lakewood charter requires an adoption before that, so of course we're going to stick to the charter and get that adopted, but I'll follow up obviously if anything is massively different. But we've projected an increase in property tax revenue and property values for Lakewood as well. But I do want to point out for the mayor and council the numbers relative to your total tax bill versus what comes to the city. It's in about that 5% range, the largest chunk, of course, going to the school district and the county. And then, of course, we have a separate levy for West Metro Fire in the city as well. And those, I know that, Mayor and Council, I know that you all know this, of course, but I'm thinking of folks who might be new to the budget study session and to the whole process. And of course, any citizens who might have only moved here recently. Okay, the other thing that we have in looking at 2020 is how are things going this year to date? And of course, we provide a profit and loss, produce a profit and loss, income statement, revenues, expenditures, and fund balance, whatever you want to call it, ins and outs for the year, and kind of look at how we're doing. So I mentioned we've got 7 months worth of sales taxes. It's increased 0.9. I already brought that number up. Property taxes have decreased year to date, $14,524, basically the same. And that's common and not unexpected because the reassessments only occur, every other year. So that's not that unusual. That's kind of in line with what we've been expecting. Building use tax is down 49%, but we knew that because 2018 was such a very large year, not just with ordinary construction, but we were finishing off the hail damage permits as a result of the 2017 hailstorm in Lakewood. So we expected that, we budgeted for that. Motor vehicle use tax has increased again. This could be our 7th record year in vehicles. So again, if you think about the economy in Lakewood, yourself and your friends and neighbors and family members have new vehicles, and not just ordinary cars and trucks, but they've got RVs, jet skis, and everything else that contributes to this. Used cars, the market for used cars is very, very strong as well. So motor vehicle use tax has increased $222,655 year to date. Total revenue, of course, has decreased. That's right on our budget, about what we expected, $1,121,671. So we have that as an indicator. And with all of this, we can come together with the idea of what are revenues looking like. And another thing that we've done is survey our neighbors. I didn't update that in the last 30 days. I don't want to pester too much. I don't want to wear out my welcome in terms of sharing information, but this gives us first half statistics on where Lakewood stands. So at the end of June, the city was 0.8%, and you can see what some of the neighbors are doing. I tried to pick a kind of a basket of Jefferson County plus similar size, and so forth that was nearby. So you can kind of see what's going on across the metro area. And isn't it a mix in terms of, growth, shopping dynamics have changed, particularly for Wheat Ridge. They've got some new and interesting retail open. Of course, other communities have a sales tax on groceries, so that's kind of driving some of what they're seeing as well. So now it's time to transition. We've kind of built up what's going on in revenues. Now it's time to shift gears and talk about expenditures. How are we doing year to date? I just want to tell you, we've had an increase as you would expected, substantially in the police department because we're staffing up. I'm going to give you a few more details on that here in just a minute. And then also, relatively speaking, our vacancies are very low. We're retaining lots of folks. Kudos to our human resources department. So 2020 budget, and I've got the revenues and expenditures for the general fund and the Tabor fund set aside, so you can see that they kind of mesh together. They can be a little bit of a blend. And I know that at this time last year, I got the question and we had quite a bit of discussion regarding the operating subtotal and the difference between that. And for 2020, it is $6,588,422, and that would mean a 5% savings needed for revenues to equal expenses. And this dates back, I think, a little more than 5 years ago, when each year the city would have savings. We would find opportunities to save. We'd have more vacancies than we anticipated, and we would build up the city's reserves. And that was just the vision that mayor and council at the time had. And then the idea was we want to use some of those funds to do lots of different things within the organization. Some capital, some personnel. We increased in a number of different areas, primarily in our police department. We added agents, we added some civilians and so forth. And what we did is we managed that very carefully so that we kept our expenditures within our revenues. And to wit, what you will see is that here has been the operating budget unspent each year. These are audited figures. So you see $5,386,440 was last year. And then you see the other numbers for the intervening years. But I'll show you that last year there was an operating surplus of about $250,000. So even though last year's budget similarly had expenditures exceeding revenues, the savings balanced that out, and actually reserves increased as a result. Setting aside funds retained from the Tabor election as well, which is now the 2 years combined exceeds $20 million, and you'll hear more about that as we go on tonight. So operating revenues and expenditures very much in balance, as you see here, and I'll show you a chart on the reserves which brings that into greater focus. The alternative is to decrease programs. The alternative is to decrease personnel and staff. That's the only way that the draft budget, of course, revenues equal expenditures, but then we will save. That's just the nature of the beast. We save each year, strategically, and then somewhat, due to vacancies and other things we can't control. So, speaking of expenditures, and Mayor and Council, I know you know this, we spend 75%, 74.4 on personnel, 25 on services and supplies, and most of those services and supplies are to support the personnel. So fuel for the police cars, that's in the 25%. Electricity in buildings, that's in the 25%. Paper in the copiers, of course. Services and supplies as well. So we are a services organization. We don't own any patents. We don't have any inventory. We don't have any work in progress or finished goods or anything like that. Strictly services. So I like to say our assets leave the building every night, and that's in our personnel. Of course, some of them are 24/7, as you well know. But now is a time when I would usually highlight what's going on in the general fund, and I'll just give you a number or two on the Tabor Fund, and then I'm going to hand it over to our police chief, Dan McCaskey, and he's going to describe in a number of slides things happening in the police department here in a moment. So, cue to Mr. McCaskey. We are adding a sustainability planner position to our planning department in the general fund. You see that, and we talked about that with the Budget and Audit Board. Another major investment is in performance pay adjustments. I think, Mayor and Council, but anybody in the audience, we are on a pay-for-performance approach to compensation. And of course, our Human Resources Director, Jeff Dolan, could talk to you about total compensation. And we've planned for that in our performance pay adjustments. So that's a big item. And then I also need to talk about police investment. And you see the percentages here are very meaningful. And they're in the book. You can check the math if you like. Welcome you to do that. And wasn't it timely of the Lakewood Sentinel to publish an article Thursday on our 28 recruits? That was so helpful to me in this presentation. Very glad for that. But they did not mention the 15 new agents that we have in field training too. They will finish in November, and they will hit the streets unfettered to provide services, safety and protection for the Lakewood community. So really, we're talking about hitting the streets here with 43 officers in the pipeline. And also, we have 24 recruits budgeted. I can show you the page in the book for 2020, and we'll do 2 police academies. I do want to tell you that there's some flexibility in that. One of the things we do is if we have a greater number, we have the flexibility already in the budget. And I mean we, the police chief, I should say, but human resources and finance as well. If attrition is greater than anticipated, we can have a 2 recruit classes greater than 12 each. We can go, we can go as high as 35 or 40 if absolutely necessary, because the police academy can accommodate a number of agents even higher. But for the moment, we believe it's 24. That number is in our budget book. It's very meaningful, and it's really leading to the increase in costs that you see for 2019. So if you just take the police department's 2018 versus 2019, you see a difference of 7.7%. That's a very large number. And then there are 2 things. One, it's just the head count increasing, but also increases in compensation and other expenses happening in the police department that amount to that. And then for 2020 is where we're really bringing aboard. You read about the 28 recruits, and one thing that I don't think the author of the article mentioned is it is the largest police academy in the history of Lakewood. And I said that just 2 years ago. In 2017 was the largest. So we have a number of agents in the pipeline. Chief McCaskey will be able to give you more details on that in just a moment. But I just wanted to show those two investments as being the biggest number increase for 2020. Now, aside from that, in addition to the $12,536,000 that was voted on in November, and that's programmed, Council adopted Resolution 2018-36 that set forth the spending that was accomplished in the vote, and that's all underway. You're going to hear about that from my three colleagues here in a moment. That was a year ago, though. We're doing the 2020 budget, and there is an additional, and I want to make sure that word is clear, an additional $8,152,566, and I put the word I don't know if it's a word, but I put the expression non-refund, retained, however you want to describe it, requirement as was voted on last November. And in addition, the requirements are a little different than the first amount of money. The first amount of money, I don't have to recall, was programmed in a certain way. And now this 8,152,566 will be programmed differently. And I mentioned that earlier that it's in the city manager's budget message. There are more details on the dollar amounts related there too. But I'm having my colleagues really now talk about the projects themselves and how they work. But before I do, of course, you can see the split here. I just want to close the discussion on the general fund overall, and that's the reserves. You see here that for 2018, these are audited numbers by the city's external audit, that the reserves increased for 2018. So there was that concern last year about expenditures being greater than revenues. I understand that's that's concerning and gives a cautious approach. At the same time, you see that the reserves increased as a result of the savings and so forth that I described. I also just want to close with the idea I mentioned earlier. These reserves are earning interest, and $30,400,000 is a lot of money. It really is. That money's there on reserve for rainy days. We've had those. We've had a pool that sprung a leak, and it was $3 million to rebuild and repair that service that many citizens talked about. That was last decade. But there are all kinds of possible emergencies and so forth. And you might wonder, how's that measure up? How's that measure up? And I'll show you. So I've got present here, again, these are just in alphabetical order. That was the best way for me to do it. But we've got some neighbors we share some borders with. We've got a county in there that and some others in between. And I've expressed this in two different ways. First, the column on the left for each of these agencies is the percentage of reserves, meaning the amount of reserves divided by expenses. So it's the old expression, the old expression, you should keep 6 months spending in the bank. We've all probably heard that. Maybe I'm dating myself with that though. Some generations ago, we would hear, keep 6 months savings in the bank. That was the advice from the greatest generation, those who went through the Depression. So if you had 6 months spending in the bank, you'd have a 50% fund balance or a 50% reserve, right? 1/2 year. So Arvada has about 6 months in the bank at 48.3%, and they have in cash 44.9 million. Now you understand the numbers. And you can see Lakewood is lesser than that. And that's something for us all to keep an eye on. I do want to tell you that was a strategic choice of the mayor and council. Over a period of years, you saw back in 2014-15, the city's reserves had reached 42 million, and there was a choice to make an investment or several investments in a number of capital projects, and mission accomplished, that was done. Now we're at a period where the reserves are, I often get this question, are they too big, too small, or just right? And each of you might have a different answer to that, depending on your level of risk and what your experience has been in that area. But it should be highlighted that some names Thornton and Centennial, they have more in cash and as a greater percentage. So that should hopefully cause some thinking on your part. And with that, I will invite my colleague, Chief Dan McCaskey, to the podium for his portion of the presentation. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Other way.
There he is. He's like a cat.
I'm definitely not like a cat. Good evening, Mayor and City Council.
Chief.
I'm here to talk about some of the police department funding for the 2020 budget and also look back on some of our other funding on Tabor. So some things we would like to do in 2020 with out of the general fund. One of the things is purchase agent hazmat equipment. So probably about 15 to 20 years ago, we started issuing what we call WMD bags, weapons of mass destruction bags. That's when sort of the world started changing. There were terrorist attacks using certain gases and chemicals and things like that. So we issued all of our agents a lot of surplus military gas masks, Tyvek suits, gloves, things like that. Well, this equipment is outdated now, and we've sort of had a piecemeal approach to replacing it, so we'd like to upgrade all of that now in using general fund dollars. We're also looking to purchase handheld metal detectors for our court marshals who work the front magnetometer and work in the courts. And we're also looking at interview room upgrades for our investigation division. A lot of our video and audio equipment is no longer serviceable and is outdated. And then finally, we're looking at a new community action team sergeant and a new technology sergeant. As you know, our CAT team's been a huge success. We've expanded it where we have 10 sworn employees. We have 2 Jefferson Center for Mental Health employees, and we hope to add 2 homeless navigators. So with a span of 14, that control is too much for one sergeant. So we'd like to add that. And the technology sergeant is a position that we want to have work with our IT partners and who kind of knows the business practices of the police department, and it's real critical with all the upgrades in technology. Moving on to what we have purchased in some of our Tabor funds from last year. I don't know if many of you have seen our new Bearcat. Hopefully you don't see it out very often, but we were really happy to purchase a vehicle for the West Metro SWAT team. And if you remember, that's a combined SWAT team with Wheat Ridge and Lakewood Police Department. And this vehicle really is something we're happy to have now. We did have an old military surplus vehicle for several years. I think most of you would see it at Colfax and Kipling because it would break down and we'd have to take it to the Lakewood Auto Electric there. So I'm hopeful this will hopefully outlast most of our careers and be in service for another 15 to 20 years. And it's a valuable tool. I haven't been able to drive it yet, but the city manager was allowed to drive it. So, but it really is a valuable tool for our SWAT team. We've used Jefferson County SWAT team's armored vehicle on several occasions. We've had to evacuate a daycare before. So this vehicle comes with multi-purposes and will really be a benefit for us. Also last year, as you know, we purchased ballistic equipment for all our police agents, and we just have a picture of it for you there, the ballistic helmet, the vest, and this is more than just the normal standard ballistic equipment we issue. This is more for high-powered rifles and some of the automatic weapons that we frequently run into now. So again, it's to make our agents much safer. And we also have been replacing our tasers. We're using that Tabor money to do that. These tasers run between $1,200 and $1,500 each. and they have a limited lifespan, basically of about 5 years, and then they're no longer warranted by the company. So we've replaced many of our old tasers, which has really been beneficial for us, and we're also purchasing recruits, our new recruits tasers as well. One of the other things, our patrol car light bar replacement, and I know last year I mentioned this, we were piecing together 10 to 15-year-old light bars to put on our new vehicles. So as you can see, we've really upgraded, and we've really sort of gotten into the next century with our light bars, and we're happy to have those. It's also a safety issue for our agents. These are much more visible to the public, so that's a very, very big safety benefit for us. And then also last year, we purchased infrared unmanned aerial vehicle cameras. These are infrared, so it allows us to see at night. So when we're searching for suspects or evidence, we can use our UAVs at night, and these cameras are really helpful in that process. Also last year, we purchased, or we spent some money on police agent health and wellness assessment. You'll see Sergeant Schmachtenberger up here taking his assessment, and this is really, some kind of in working with our human resource partners, trying to keep our police agents healthy. The healthier they are, the less cost to the city, the safer that it is for the agents. And so it's really been beneficial, and it's really a great program. We're really proud to have that. And we also purchased some license plate readers, and this is just a few pictures of some very helpful technology and for investigating crimes and looking for stolen vehicles, robbery suspects. These have really been helpful for us, and we've upgraded that technology as well because we were using some very outdated technology. So moving on for our 2020 Tabor funds, what some of the things we're looking at purchasing. This is our metal detector in our front lobby. This is used by our court marshals, and this is, again, outdated, antiquated equipment. To even get a repairman to come out and look at this earlier this year, it cost us, I think, about $3,000, and they won't repair it anymore. They said it's too old and outdated. So we're looking at replacing that. And this protects everybody in our building. It protects our citizens who come in to see us. It protects our judges, our court employees, our civilians. It protects our IT employees that work in our building. And it's on a regular basis, we confiscate guns and knives off of people that come in through that magnetometer. So it's really a big key piece of equipment for us and our court marshals. We're also going to be purchasing new mobile data computers for our next recruit class. And so we just started using these new computers earlier this year. And it's sort of been a change of business practices for us. Initially, when we first had these computers, we've actually had mobile data computers even when I was in a patrol car, so that's how long. That was back in the early 90s. So technology's come a long way, but those computers were mounted in the cars and you couldn't take them with you anywhere. Now, these are assigned to individual agents. They can take them with them into a house to take a report, into the hospital to write a report. They can take them onto a crime scene for documentation. So they're really much more efficient and much more powerful than we've ever had. And so it's been a great tool for our staff. And I know earlier this year we mentioned we went live with a new records management system, the niche records management system. So we're going to be doing a data conversion from our old iLeads records management system. We started iLeads in the fall of 2003. And so we have almost 19 years of data, or I'm sorry, 16 years of data in that iLeads system. And again, it's antiquated, and there's no way to convert that without going through a process. And we're working with our IT partners to do that. So that's important. And by law, there are public records laws that we have to convert that data. So that's a really important piece as well. We're going to be purchasing and upgrading some of our crime scene mapping software. And probably the best way to describe this is it's a digital tape measure. With this equipment, and you can stand in the middle of the room and you'll get a 3D image of the room. It'll do all your measuring for you and everything. Whereas before that would take us hours upon hours to do. It's great for major accident scenes. Arvada PD allows us to use theirs. They actually have 3 of these, this Faro crime scene mapping software. We used it on the I-70 accident. We've used it on many of our fatal accidents. And so this, again, is just going to be, it's about efficiency. It's about providing the best product for crime scene processing. And we're excited to upgrade and add some of this equipment. We're also adding a motorist assist vehicle. So we have a volunteer motorist assist team that go out mostly in the evenings during rush hour, and they help us with motorist assist. They also help us at crash scenes. And this is a picture of a vehicle. We don't have it yet, but this is similar to what it'll be, and it'll have lights, and it'll say volunteer motorist assist. But it really frees up our police agent time to on these traffic accidents. And it's a safety issue too, because they can block off, they can carry a lot of cones, they can block off, put out flares, and it protects our agents and our citizens who are involved in accidents. We're also going to replace and upgrade our Argus camera system. Most of you have probably heard this called Halo. Ours we've identified as Argus. So we're going to replace 4 cameras. These are old cameras that we've had probably 5 years now. And the new technology, the new cameras are actually going to have 360-degree views. Our current cameras, if you have to actually point it at a location for it to view to view something. So this will be a huge benefit to us. We're also going to add a 5th camera at a high crime location that we haven't determined yet. And then of the 4 that we still have, the old 4, we're going to use those at existing areas as well. They're still serviceable, but they're just not as effective and efficient as the newer ones. And then finally, we're going to add 2 homeless navigators, and this is a countywide regional effort that's been started by the city managers and the county manager, and it's been sort of a push by our elected officials throughout the county. These navigators are going to work on our CAT team. They're going to work alongside our sworn agents, and they're going to provide immediate assistance and solutions for some of our homeless issues. Jefferson County's agreed to hire a coordinator to sort of oversee all of these coordinators. Even though these 2 will be in our building, they'll work for us. They'll have one regional coordinator to coordinate their activities. And it's important we're all doing this, every municipality in Jefferson County, because homelessness knows no boundaries, and as we've seen that, it's a very transient population. And one of the concerns is if we take a sort of a strict enforcement effort or we do something different, all that does is force our homeless population into Wheat Ridge or into Denver and Arvada. And we don't want to do that. We want to coordinate our efforts to make sure that we're providing the best possible services. Also, we're going to have a memorandum of understanding with these other agencies, so the program will know what they expect and what's going to occur with it. And also, this will help us with grant funding, federally and state, because we have a coordinated effort. So this will be big throughout Jefferson County, and we plan on hiring 2. We feel that's an appropriate number for our homeless population and what'll help Lakewood. So I know there's a lot to cover there, a lot of different things, but I know we'll have questions later. So with that, I will turn it over to our Public Works Director, Mr. Jay Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening.
Good evening. You've heard a lot about different funds in the city, primarily the general fund, but others as well. And I'm going to focus on the capital improvement and preservation plan, which has a variety of funds as well. But the projects I'm going to talk about are all in that CIPP, as we refer to it. It's near the back of the large budget book. And I'll talk about the public works aspects. And I'll start with some recently and nearly completed projects, then talk about some that are coming up and one new one. Then I'll touch on Tabor as well. I'll start with stormwater and drainage projects. There are a couple of places on a couple of gulches where we have erosion on the banks and they need to be stabilized. This is a good picture. This is actually Lakewood Gulch along 7th Avenue west of Depew, the first one in this list before, and here it is after the improvements were made. It'll be much more stable, less threat to properties that are adjacent. Similar work was done on Weir Gulch, and those projects were in the range of $750,000 apiece. We did have a couple of pipe failures in the stormwater system in the last year, both of which caused no collateral damage, thankfully, except some parking lot pavement, and both have been fixed. One of the things that I'll talk about here in a few minutes is one of our efforts to reduce the likelihood of those kinds of failures happening in the future. You manage a sanitary sewer utility through this organization as well, and there are a couple of projects that are planned there or underway. Actually, Lamar Streets is completed. That's between 11th and 13th Avenue, one of many things happening on that block, 2 blocks of Lamar Street. But that was about a $400,000 project to take care of the sewer. Consolidated Mutual Water Company is going to make changes to their water line in that area, and then the Dry Gulch crossing, which goes underneath Lamar in that area, will be rebuilt as well. I'll touch on that in a couple of minutes. There's a project underway in the sanitary sewer utility, generally in the vicinity of 2nd and Wadsworth. It's nearing completion. That's about a $1,200,000 project. Street resurfacing is our largest project each year, and in 2020, that's budgeted at about $9.9 million. And that, of course, escalates each year. We are finding that construction costs are escalating faster than consumer inflation costs. Here are a couple of the things that are involved in this project. The thing that's the most obvious is when we grind off the upper layer of asphalt and put new asphalt down. New striping goes in at that time that's long lasting. It's very high contrast until the pavement begins to turn gray instead of black. But the striping still is very reflective and is a much safer operation than paint, although we'll talk about paint here in a couple of minutes. There are a variety of other techniques used. We use some seal coating, we seal cracks, we replace concrete. All of that's designed to keep the pavement in a quality of condition, both for the ride that people experience and avoiding potholes, but also it's much cheaper to invest in maintaining pavement than it is to have to rebuild. And so if we continue to do this on a timely basis, the costs are actually less over the long run. The capital program also involves purchasing vehicles and equipment. This is the new street paint vehicle that was purchased this year, a $330,000 piece of equipment, and was bought just this year. It's for painting the stripes on those roads that do not have the inlaid tape. It is one that's taken care of very nicely by the folks who do the striping in the city. The one that it replaced was 20 years old. It was a 1999 model. And when you think about all the moving parts, all the liquids that go through here, the different kinds of paint, and all the other operations that have to happen in all kinds of weather, they've done an outstanding job on what turned into a $330,000 purchase to replace. In 2020, we're going to replace one of the vac trucks. It's a $440,000 piece of equipment, and it's used for cleaning both sanitary sewers and also storm sewers throughout the community. As another example, the dump trucks are about $260,000 a piece. We have 26 of those in the fleet. And they're more than just dump trucks. They're used to haul material. They're also used for asphalt patching. They're also used for the whole snow and ice operations. So they're fairly expensive. And of course, equipment replacement and vehicle replacement also includes patrol cars and community resources vehicles and a variety of other equipment that's used throughout the organization. Some changes on the roadway system that are happening. Some additional speed display signs have been installed. There's a representative picture in the upper right corner. Try to remind people how fast they're going compared to the speed limit and encourage them to be a little bit safer. On the lower right, we added some bike lanes around the community. Typically, we do that when we're doing overlays anyway, so that we're not having to remove a bunch of striping. We're just putting in new striping in the locations that serve both the motor vehicle traffic as well as the bicycle traffic. We added about 3 miles of that. And then also, I know you're all familiar recently with the addition of the bike boxes at Alameda and Garrison. And for those who may hear this that aren't, Garrison has about as much bike traffic as any street, probably more than any other street in Lakewood. And we have a bottleneck at Alameda. So we added these bike boxes, which are a bit of an experiment. They're a pilot project that were grant funded, and we'll see how they work out in that particular location. But because of the bike traffic, that seemed to be the most logical place to utilize those. We do a lot of traffic signal operation modifications during the course of the year. Some of those are physical, where we might add a new traffic signal head. Some of them are computer created, where the phasing might be different. In some cases, for instance, there's a left turn crash that shows in this lower left corner. With the police department, we collaborate on an evaluation of our higher accident locations every year and try to figure out whether or not there's something physically that can be done to reduce the risk of crashes. In some cases, that means making left turns only allowed on green arrows, other kinds of techniques as well. Oftentimes, there's not a physical thing that can be done, but where there is, we try to make those modifications. We'll make temporary modifications too for the Alameda work that's happened east of Wadsworth over the last year or so. We changed some of the signal timing to accommodate the differences that were happening in that area. Jefferson County closed the Sims roundabout south of I-25, or I'm sorry, US 285 for a while. And so more traffic moved over to Kipling. We changed the signal timing on Kipling to try to accommodate that. Let me touch on some of the projects that are currently underway that Public Works is involved in or upcoming. And I'll start this time with roadways. These are projects you've seen before in the budget, but they're getting closer to construction. As you know, many of these projects take a fair amount of time. The Kipling left turn lanes at Hampden are illustrated by the picture on the right. This is the southbound left turn that's stacked up to Girton, perhaps. Maybe not Girton. Yeah, Girton. And there will be a second left turn lane for folks going south and turning east onto 285. The picture on the left is Kipling just north of 6th Avenue. So if you come onto Kipling from the frontage road and head north, you immediately find yourself in this lane with these big arrows telling you that the lane's ending. So this lane would continue up to 10th Avenue. It does a couple of things. It makes that continuous so people can come off of that and flow a little bit better. There's a number of driveways along there that people coming in and out of that can use this lane as well. And there's a drop-off time for Lakewood High School in the morning where there is so much traffic that it backs out onto Kipling and just stops that right lane for a period of time. This will provide an additional lane for that kind of storage temporarily in the mornings. The third item on this list is a safety study on the east portion of Wadsworth. I'm sorry, east portion of Colfax, generally east of Wadsworth. We have more unfortunate pedestrian collisions with other kinds of vehicles in that area than I think anywhere else in the city. We're trying to figure out some solutions. Those will probably be proposed to be physical. Many of the other problems aren't necessarily inanimate physical issues. They are human issues, but they still exist. And so we're trying to find some ways to reduce that risk in that area. This is a fairly long list. I think about a dozen traffic signal upgrades or replacements. 6 of these have grants. They're on state highways. The other 6 are owned by the city. And this is a part of our program to continually replace signals that are old. We have some signals in Lakewood that are older than the city is, more than 50 years old. And eventually this equipment just wears out, rusts, needs to be replaced. So the city council added a program in the capital improvement program, I think 2 years ago, to begin replacing gradually these signals. And this is a continuation of that effort. Number of walks, none of these are new either. Several along the W line and one on 13th Avenue that's in that vicinity. And then Sheridan from 6th to 10th. This is a good example of one of those projects that takes a while. Perhaps that's an understatement, gauging the reaction. But it has been in the budget for a while. And there's a large grant associated with this, and large grants come with strings that are associated with the people who give the money. And this one has taken a while. There's also right-of-way that had to be acquired along this stretch. That takes a little bit of time as well. Utility relocations take some time. So it's not uncommon for transportation projects to take 3 years or so just to get all of those kinds of things done. The good news is the bids are going to be open next week, I think it's next week. So the Sheridan project's about to go into construction. Talk about several storm drainage projects. I mentioned earlier that we had a couple of storm pipes fail in parking lots, and we have earlier this year and late last year purchased a video system that runs on a little robot that we can run down storm sewer pipes, we can run it down sanitary sewer pipes. And the goal obviously is to identify problems before they become so bad that things collapse. On the storm sewer system, we have about 200 miles of pipe as well as the 75 miles of gulches. That McIntyre Gulch project at Holland just opened. This is a picture of some of the failure that occurred right next to Holland Street. It's between 2nd and 4th Avenues, and this is the finished product. The street just opened, I think it was last week or the week before. About $1,300,000 to make that improvement. There's also a new utility billing system, which is great news because it gave folks a way to pay their bills online much easier. And it serves this utility, the stormwater utility, as well as the sewer utility and the water utility. Several other projects. I mentioned Lamar Street between 11th and 13th. There's a crossing to carry dry gulch under that location that needs to be improved and replaced. There's construction already underway on Independence Street south of 8th Avenue. This is right near Lakewood High School. That work is almost done. We're in the planning stage for some work on a part of Applewood, which is on the north side of 20th near Union Street. There's several little issues there. We've kind of lumped all those together to analyze and design those solutions. Very preliminary conceptual estimates, probably about $500,000 to make those improvements. Going back up the list a little bit, Independence Street was a $700,000 project, and the Dry Gulch project's going to be about $1 million. And then North Dry Gulch, you've got a update scheduled on your study session agenda for October 7th, so more to come on that one. On to the sanitary sewer. This again is one of the places where we'll be using the video inspection process that I mentioned earlier. We do a lot of lining of existing sewer pipes, and over a mile a year. In 2018, a little over a mile. In 2019, almost 7,000 linear feet. This is used in cases where the capacity of the pipe is adequate, but they're either really old and beginning to fail, or they have a lot of root intrusion. And we can line the pipe. It makes it slightly smaller, but it essentially is a brand new pipe without having to dig the whole thing up. It's a much more economical approach, and we do that in a variety of locations. The final project on here starts at about 10th and Lee Street and runs upstream for about 4,000 feet, and that'll be a capacity modification that will serve that part of town as well. I should mention, I suppose, that the sanitary sewer utility, for those who aren't familiar, all of you on council are, is only one of the providers in the city of Lakewood. It has about 6,900 accounts, about 107 miles of pipe, and with the inspection process, we're going to be in a position to review all of those pipes once every 3 years. The water utility is even smaller. In the far northeast corner of town, about 800 accounts. We've got a couple of projects under design right now, very close to construction. One is some work on 20th Avenue between Fenton and Depew. There are a few dead-end lines there, which is not ideal for a water system because it doesn't enhance the water quality as much as a continuous loop would. It also provides a little bit more risk for things like fire flow and that kind of thing. So a couple of loop projects on 20th Avenue, and then replacing the Colfax line from Pierce to Sheridan. This is a very old line, and we've got a plan to actually relocate a part of that, but it continues to have breaks that we have to go out and fix occasionally, and we'll get that taken care of. These two projects together are going to add up to about $1.2 million. I slipped up and I wrote new projects here in the plural. There is but one. And it exists because we got a grant. It's a Safe Routes to Schools grant. I believe this is the first one Lakewood's ever received. And let me tell you who collaborated on this. These are very competitive grants. They're awarded by the Colorado Department of Transportation. We were thrilled because the collaboration included the school principal, the school district, the parent-teacher organization, West Metro Fire. This project starts right next to the West Metro station at Garrison and First, and goes west to Creighton Middle School. Jefferson County Health, Bicycle Colorado, who's also going to do some training for the kids at Creighton, which will be great. And then within this organization, in addition to Public Works, the Police Department, of course, was involved with the SRO that's at Creighton, and then the City Manager's Office was involved as well. And that's the kind of collaborative effort it takes to get these grants. The grant will pay about 70 to 75% of the project cost, and this will add a sidewalk all the way from the middle school property to Garrison. And one of the things I should mention is that beginning with this school year that recently started, Creighton now has about 300 additional kids because the sixth graders have moved into this school as well. So it'll be a even more heavily used location. That's just another view of the street that's out there today. Now I'll take my turn at talking about projects funded with what would have been Tabor refund money based on the vote that the citizenry did a year ago. And several of these, 4 of these, were on the list last year, so they aren't new. And then I'll mention 3 others. This is the full list, and I'll have a slide for each one of these, so you don't need to worry about trying to remember all of these. These first 4, beginning with Union in Florida, were on the list last year. This will be the addition of traffic signal at Union in Florida. Union has a pretty continuous flow of traffic for many hours of the day, and that's what helped this, or made this intersection one that warranted a traffic signal. The council knows that there are some objective criteria that are used to determine whether or not traffic signals are warranted, because they have disadvantages. They tend to cause rear-end collisions, a variety of other things, delay in traffic, but there are points where it makes sense, and this is a location where it's warranted and will be installed. And if you think about Kipling to the east here, there is a signal at Kipling in Florida, so it's one of the places people get on and off Kipling, come west, and they have to get on Union, because as you can see, this is a T intersection. North and south from here, the 2 signals on Kipling are Kentucky, and if you come west to Union, there's one at that intersection, which turns out to be Mississippi and Union. And then if you go south, it's at Jewel. There's also a signal there. So this is kind of a missing piece. The other advantage this will create is some gaps in the Union traffic, so that if you're at one of the other side streets, you'll have a few more opportunities to go onto or off of Union a little more easily. The design's underway on this one. It's, as most signals are, it's probably $700,000 or $800,000. This may be a little cheaper since it's 3 legs. A second project that was mentioned last time is this Union pedestrian crossing at Siri Lane. Siri Lane's in quotes because it's not a public street. This is the roadway, the private roadway that goes by Wendy's to the west and goes by Good Times to the east. And you may recall that Union Boulevard in this area has beds on both sides, it has restaurants on both sides, it has office buildings on both sides, and people tend to walk around more here, particularly midday. So one of the recommendations in the 2018 Union Transportation Plan, and then of course in the vote, this project was recommended as well. A little farther north, this is 4th and Union, looking west. So that long line of cars are all trying to make a left turn onto Union and go north, and a lot of those then want to make a right turn onto 6th Avenue. Well, by turning from the left-hand lane like you're supposed to, they have to cross multiple lanes to get over to the right turn lane today. And there are 2 left turn lanes coming off of 4th. So everybody also has to merge there that wants to get off into the right turn lane onto 6th. This project, also discussed last year, would add a second right turn lane. It's not a dedicated right turn lane. It actually takes the right of the 2 through lanes and makes it an optional lane. You can either continue to go straight as you can today, or you can make a right turn onto 6th Avenue. So you won't have to cross as many lanes if you're making this left turn off of 4th in order to get onto eastbound 6th Avenue. This also was recommended in the 2018 Union Transportation Plan. The other project that was talked about last year is, this is actually looking at the traffic coming around the corner on Union. Sorry, I forgot I had another picture there. The additional project that was mentioned last year was to add a path on the east side of Wadsworth, south of Mansfield. The sidewalk that you see in the foreground of this picture is the one that was required of the developer that built the apartments kind of on the hilltop there south of, between Mansfield and Quincy. They were required at their expense to build this path. It is a dead end into a guardrail. And if you look beyond the guardrail, there's a bit of a path there, so people are walking there. But the guardrail's right up next to the road, so people have to cross the guardrail. It goes down a hill. So this gap would be filled in. It's a property that it has been an office building and a parking lot for decades. So it's not being redeveloped. There's not an opportunity for it to be built by somebody else. It's filling in a gap. The apartments, of course, built their section. This is looking the other way from that sidewalk that the apartments built. And across the street here to the south is the Havern School property, which also has been there for many, many decades, built in a time when not all developments were required to build these kind of facilities. And in this case, the hill goes the other way, but it tends to push people out towards the high-speed, high-volume Wadsworth traffic. So that portion would also be constructed as a part of this project instead of having this roadside gravelly path. Further south, the assisted living facility that's under construction just north of Quincy, they have some frontage on Wadsworth. They'll have to build their section. And then there's an existing medical office building close to Quincy that was built again in this earlier era. We're going to try to get that done at the same time as these other pieces. Now let me shift to some newer projects that are additions to what you saw a year ago. The first is on 20th Avenue between Owens and Nelson. Owens is across from the Denver water plant. So it's what sometimes people call the YMCA property. There's been a lot of words used around that piece of vacant property. But just east of there is this conclusion of the sidewalk where it points people back out into the street. And if you go on to the other end, you're near a school and a church and the library, and this sidewalk also ends. This would be about a quarter of a mile section of walk. It would fill in what would then be a total mile section from Sims to Kipling on the south side here. Generally, that's what the roadway looks like today. So there's some roadway drainage or roadside drainage that'll have to be dealt with, and home accesses as well. Next, we go to the southeast part of town. This is a part of Sheridan. Sheridan's been a long-term project to get a sidewalk and a path on, and while a lot of progress has been made, there's still some gaps. I think this picture was taken by someone standing at the Dairy Queen looking south from Florida. I know the person did not go in Dairy Queen, but although the temptation was great. So there's a gap here, generally from this point clear to Jewel. Whether or not the money's going to stretch far enough to get to Jewel is pretty questionable. So what we're talking about here is Florida to Iowa, using the philosophy that it's better to overpromise or underpromise and overdeliver. Perhaps we'll be able to get a little bit further. This is another picture down there. You can see how close the high-speed, high-volume traffic on Sheridan is at this location. And then finally, there's a piece of Independence that I'll talk about on the west side from 6th Avenue up to Lakewood High School. This path that you're looking at here is actually along the frontage road. It's also the ramp onto 6th Avenue as you're looking west from Garrison. This was built at the time that the new 6th Avenue bridge was built that goes across Garrison. This was also built going to the west. And it does get to Independence, which is the street next to Lakewood High School. But once you get to Independence, you turn north and you have kids walking in the street up to the school and back. And the traffic's pretty significant. That picture on the left was taken during the drop-off time in the morning. There's a lot of cars there. Its visibility is not great. Everybody's being as careful as they can be. They're going slowly, but there's just a lot going on during that time. On the right is the sidewalk that was built by the high school, Lakewood High School, on its frontage, and it just stops there at the south side of the high school. So this would fill in that gap on the west side of Independence. That's the end of my talk about projects, but I do want to talk just a little bit about the various funds that are in the Capital Improvement and Preservation Plan. Partly because I think we should rename it, but I'll get to that in a moment. All of these different funds have a part of the capital program. They're not necessarily 100% in the capital program. As you know, the Tabor Fund has other things in it as well, as do the water and sanitary sewer and other utilities, because they have operational aspects too. But starting from the bottom, or let me talk about the whole list for just a moment. In some ways, and this isn't a perfectly accurate description, but it's pretty close generally, you act as the board of a conglomerate. And you have many business operations that are independent of each other in many ways. And this is a list of some of those. Tabor, the voters decided some specific things those monies can be used for, and they come from a specific place. So I'll take that one off the list here for just a minute. The next 3 or 4 are enterprise funds, which, as the council knows and others may not, are dedicated business units where the revenues come from the users and the money can only be used for that purpose. So we have a water enterprise fund. All the funds that come into that enterprise fund are paid by the water utility users, the city of Lakewood's water utility users, the 800 or so customers. And the only place that money can be used is to serve those customers for water purposes. That's true on the other enterprises as well. So let me take those off the list. The next one is Community Development Block Grant, and it, of course, is federal money. It has specific geographic areas it can be used in, specific kinds of purposes it can be used for, and it actually has a little bit of a different budget cycle. So let me take that off. And we're now down to things that there's a little bit more flexibility on, but these have specific uses as well. Obviously, equipment replacement is for replacement. Conservation Trust and Open Space Fund, Mr. Dorr mentioned earlier, they are for those kinds of uses and come from certain places. The Capital Improvement Fund is essentially all within the city's control on how to use that, but it has to be used for capital improvements. The sum here is that these are the pieces that you have the most flexibility with, and they are primarily used for replacement, maintenance, and for some existing long-term obligations. In fact, large percentages of them are used for those purposes. So I think we should rename this the Capital Preservation and Improvement Plan, because we do a lot more preservation than we do improvement. And it's just in some ways, a feature of a physically more mature community. It's a 50-year-old community. Parts of the community are much older than that. We have facilities that just need to be taken care of, replaced and repaired at the appropriate times. So a larger portion of that effort is now happening from these kinds of funding sources than once was. And that's natural, but it does reduce the availability of funding for new projects, which in part is why there was only one new project that you saw tonight other than the Tabor projects. With that, I have concluded my comments, and I'll introduce Director Kit Newland from the Community Resources Department.
Great. Thank you. Nice job. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The screen right here says I have 3 minutes. I'm not sure I can do it.
2.5. It'll be green.
Get going.
30 seconds yellow.
All right. I will be talking about projects and for community resources as well as Tabor, and starting with Newland Square. We replaced the Newland Square Park playground and made some other site improvements and opened that park to the public in June. This was a combination of NPP funding from Two Creeks, submittal by Two Creeks, and CDBG funding. Just this weekend, on Saturday, we had a grand opening, or open house to the public, to celebrate the interior improvements at Washington Heights. In 2015, there was a building assessment completed, and they identified some critical needs that we had at that facility. And as you know, this is a historic building, so it's critical that we keep up the improvements to that site. And so those improvements included structural repairs, the air handling system, windows were repaired, we added LED lighting, we made exterior and masonry repairs, and the interior was painted as well. Next, let's see, it was September the 4th. We did a grand opening of this new addition to Addenbrook Park, which is a fitness court. This was a project in cooperation with the National Fitness Campaign. They funded part of this, and this is a huge hit so far. Really great equipment that's easy to use. Lots of people can use it at the same time. And this picture that you see on your left is a picture of our first older adult fitness class, and we've got several classes out there, and then we also, of course, it's open all day long. for people to just drop in and use. So this is really popular. Another cool thing about it is that you can download an app, and the app walks you right through an exercise program while you're out there. At Carmody, we had a malfunctioning or non-functioning spray pad for a few years, and we finally cobbled together funds to add a new spray pad and make some other site improvements. We had some drainage issues there. So the new spray pad opened on May 29th. Really also very well received and has been busy this summer. We added some additional hours to accommodate the high interest. This project also included the addition of some outdoor fitness equipment. This was something that was called for in our Imagine plan. We heard from a lot of residents that they're very interested in outdoor fitness opportunities. So this was an addition that we decided to put onto this project, and also been received really well. This gives parents the opportunity to do a little workout while kids are in swim lessons. We have just completed recently some really significant improvements at the Clement Community Center, the exterior. We had some trees that were overgrown and concrete that was pretty significantly cracked. So we combined that into a really nice project of clearing out the low brush and trees and adding some nice seating areas, cleaned it up quite a bit, and we are hoping that our patrons and guests will find this much more attractive. We are starting to see a lot of homeless people using that for camping, so hopefully these improvements are going to help. Oh, the before is on the left. I mean, after is on the left. Yeah. And then we got some feedback from the Lakewood Advisory Commission, committee, that we needed to add more community gardens a couple years ago, and we've been working with Denver Urban Gardens to identify sites, and we did complete our first garden, our first new garden in the last 5 or 6 years at Jefferson Green Park. Jefferson Green Park is located at 333 South Field Street, and you can see what it looked like beforehand when just the sod was torn up, and then what it looks like now. It's been really successful. And we celebrated a renaming of a park, the first one to my memory since I've been with the city for 17 years now. So this was really an exciting occasion. As you all know, James E. Harrison was a Tuskegee Airman, and the Glennon Heights HOA requested that we rename South Sims Park in his honor. And what a great inspiration he was. That was a really great day. We celebrated his life, and there's a beautiful plaque out there in his honor now. So he was an incredible person who made an impression on the city. He was involved in the incorporation of the city, and was also very, very heavily involved in the Glennon Heights HOA. And as you may recall, this was is a park that the Glennon Heights homeowners actually own, and the city leases it, and we of course take care of it. So it was a really nice partnership with that group. We've been working away for many years now, probably 8 or 10 years, to improve medians all over the city. And this Colfax area from Quail to Kipling is the latest improvement, and you can see the picture on your right is where they, after they finished planting everything, and it looks so much better. We're continuing to try to improve medians all over the city when funds allow. We've been celebrating the 50th anniversary throughout the year, and this was one of the highlights of the 50th anniversary. At the Heritage Center, a new exhibit, a new 50th exhibit was installed. This took the place of the previous exhibit, Spirit of Lakewood, and this one is called Lakewood, a 20th Century Journey. This exhibit incorporates 3 main themes. One is the city's incorporation, the other is the Federal Center Ordinance Plant, and the third is the importance of health and wellness in the city of Lakewood. So many of you attended that in June, and I think it was June 27th, and we had a great celebration. And now touch on projects that are underway and upcoming. Right now, you can see that the Carmody gym floor is being replaced. This was a project that I spoke to you about last year. The floor was rubber, tartan, old surface, and literally peeling. Big chunks were peeling. So we're in the process right now of replacing that floor, and this is expected to be finished and open to the public at the end of the month. At Mount Air Park, we heard from our CAT team that we really needed to do a better job lighting this park, and we've been working on this project to try to get the designs just right. You can see the picture, the specs on the right, you can see where the new lights will be. We've basically tried to cover the perimeter of the park so that, and we're working very closely with the CAT team to deal with these homelessness issues. This park has a tendency to draw a lot of our homeless population. So we're hoping that these new lights are gonna help out with that situation. And we're expecting this project to be completed either late this year or more likely early next year. Another 50th celebration involves a new sculpture at Addenbrook Park. And this artist was selected. We went through the public art process with that committee, and they narrowed the submittals down to about 3 or 4. And then we put this information, the choices out on the internet, I think on Lakewood Together, and we got lots of input from citizens. And this was the final choice. This is a sculpture by Colin Parsons, who is an artist who actually lives in the city of Lakewood. So it's nice to have somebody who understands Lakewood, and he's been here his entire life. The sculpture is called Echoes and Reflections. It's hard to tell in this conceptual, but those panels are actually reflective material. So it's sort of echoes of past and reflections to the future. And it's a really great theme. This project is underway, and then we're going to celebrate the actual dedication on October 12th at the park. Last year, the year before, we finished phase 1 rehab, which was the exterior rehab of Caretaker's Cottage. We got another state historic grant to fund the interior renovation. And this is also a historic site. So it's important, again, that the renovations are done to historic specifications. The interior renovations will serve as an exhibit featuring May Bonfils, who lived here on site, and will also serve as a public research center for citizens to use to study Lakewood's history. And then we'll also be able to accommodate public meetings at this site. And this is a really fun project. And this was a project that was recommended by the Lakewood Advisory Committee as well. Interpretive signs, historic interpretive signs of some of our most historic parks. You can see the park sites listed there. And then this sign of James Ritchie Park, this is an example, a template of what the designs will look like. So it focuses on the history of the family, how the park was established, and so forth. This is not a final draft, just so you know, so they won't look exactly like this. At Addenbrook Park, we will be replacing the playground. It's a very small playground for a very large and busy park. We're hoping to get a larger playground in there. This project is planned for later this year or early next year. And then we'll also be improving concrete replacement around the shelter there at Addenbrook. Lots of attention on Addenbrook this year. And then one of my colleagues earlier mentioned this Denver Water property, sometimes referred to as the YMCA property. But this property now is owned by Denver Water. Excuse me, the address is 1960 Quail Street, and you can see in the shading in that left drawing the proposed site for some park amenities. So we are leasing this very small part of the park from Denver Water for 10 years to add some park amenities. And we did hold a public meeting on August 1st, and we still have our Lakewood Together site up, so we're still taking feedback from people about what they'd like to see at this site. And then on the same night, August 1st, we also discussed with that neighborhood the Westland Park Master Plan. You may recall that neighbors submitted an NPP grant to have a playground added to this park last year. And we decided to work with them to get this site plan done prior to having another NPP submitted, because this is a little tiny site. As you can see, it's not, I think it's 0.7 acres. The address is 1690 Owen Street. So we want to do, make this space the best, do the best we can with it, even though it's a tiny little space. So we're going to add a bridge, a pedestrian bridge over that ditch there, and add a playground probably and some other amenities to make it more attractive and usable for neighbors. This is another CDBG project replacing this playground at Idlewild Park, 10300 West 14th Avenue. Just by looking at this in the photograph, you can see that this is a very old playground. Everything is metal and wood, and it desperately needs to be replaced. So we'll be working with neighbors on this project as well, and expect this to be completed mid-year next year, hopefully before summer. And this Meadowlark Cottages on, I want to try to give you the address here, on Cody, 110 South Cody Street, have been with the city for quite some time now. Previously, they were owned by the school district and used for elementary education. In 2000, the city offered preschool programs out of these cottages, but in 2008, it became unusable space for us. So the buildings have basically just been used for storage for our department, and we want to make better use of this site. And so we've decided that this would make a nice little pocket park. This week is when those two buildings that will be demoed. And when the demo is complete, we'll be working with the neighborhood to solicit their ideas about how to use this site, and also what they would like to see this site renamed. Since right down the street we have a Meadowlark Park, we need to find a new name for this particular site. So we'll be working with the neighbors on that. This Glennon Heights pool and bathhouse renovation has been a really slow project, but we are making progress. The bathhouse building now has been demoed and construction has started. The project is expected to be complete before summer season next year. We've had some slowdowns for a weird variety of reasons, like somebody got hit by a bicyclist had a broken leg. He was an architect, all kinds of weird things. Somebody died. And anyway, it's really slowed our project down, but we are going to make it happen. Ray Ross Park Shelter, this was another CDBG project. We put this out for bid early this year, and the bids came in way, way, way higher than we could afford. So we went back to do some refinement of the budget, and it's back out again, and we hope to have this done late this year or early next year. The reason we want to add another shelter here is simply because this is such a heavily used park. The spray feature has really attracted a lot of people, and there's only that one shelter there. It's very heavily used. So this will help our visitors to the park have better space. So that's all of the projects, and then I wanted to just touch on the Tabor funds that will be used in our department. So there's two projects. One is the $8.5 million that's available for park acquisitions, and I met with you a couple of months ago, and we talked about this project and the gap analysis that was done by the Conservation Fund. They analyzed existing and some potential acquisitions that we had identified. They also did a complete scan of the city to see if there were other opportunities for park acquisition that we may have missed. So the goal of this project for us is to look at creating a very equitable park system, which to us in this industry means that people can get to a park amenity or green space that's publicly operated within 10-minute walk of their home. So the pink or purple areas on this map are identifying for you gaps in that system, places where citizens may not be able to reach a park. So we want, so that was one of the first things they did. Secondly, they wanted to look at parcels that were close to the, a 10-minute walk within RTD stops in order for, this was all related to transit-oriented development. Residential growth would be happening, potentially happening in those areas. And we want to have park spaces close to that residential growth so that people can walk potentially to the light rail, to home, to a park space, all within that same 10 minutes. And then lastly, they looked at parcels through the equity lens, social equitability, and they used the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control's Social Vulnerability Index for that. And that looks at 13 different indices that, including things such as socioeconomics, people's ability to get places, so transportation, first languages spoken in the home, minority status, and household composition and disabilities. So given those areas that they analyzed, they came up with identifying the northeast portions of the city as having the largest gaps in social vulnerability, the largest need, and gaps in park areas as well. So the study that they did identified potential acquisitions in these three areas: existing park network gaps, so what we have so far, and that was what I just spoke about with the pink. And then secondly, expansion of an existing park. So whenever there's an opportunity to purchase a property that is adjacent to an existing park, we want to take advantage of that if we can. An example is some properties potentially along the green belt where we can expand that space and make it even better for citizens. And then the last area would be expansion of trails and trail right-of-ways, which is a overarching goal across the state of Colorado now. With all the use that we're seeing in trails, we need to make sure that we can connect people really well through our trail system. So this tool that was created with our work with the Conservation Fund is going to provide us with technical and geospatial analysis so that we can look at these potential acquisitions as they come up, and also proactively with the list that we already have with your direction, and that provides us with a really effective decision-making tool to make these choices and decisions and recommendations. And then the second area are the Bear Creek Trail improvements. This was mentioned in the budget book. This is how we are recommending to use the $2.7 million in Tabor funds for park improvements, park maintenance. This, as you all have heard on multiple occasions, this trail, this Greenbelt Trail, is very busy, and there are conflicts and accidents regularly. So far this year, we've already had 3 very serious accidents, in addition to multiple conflicts. I don't know if you saw the news this weekend where there was a fist fight that broke out over at Cheeseman Park between a scooter user and a cyclist, and everybody's talking about who gets the right of way. And what's that? Oh, moped, sorry. It was a moped. No scooters. Yes, sorry. A micro-mobility device. Yeah. I don't think anybody won. I think everybody is going to end up getting cited, and it's very bad. Anyway, this work is supported not only by what you hear from citizens, but also by 2 trail plans that have been recently conducted. One, we hired a consultant to do a trails assessment for us in 2016, and they recommended a whole bunch of improvements on Bear Creek Greenbelt. And right now, the Jeffco Open Space is undergoing a master plan for trails across the county, and all of the same issues came up when they talked to stakeholders about excuse me, recommendations about how we can improve that trail. So the scope of the project involves what you see here: replacing concrete that's in bad shape, and then also widening the trail. There's some places on this trail that are pretty narrow, potentially, I don't know if anything goes as low as 6 feet, but 8 feet. And we want to try to get as much of it as we can, 10 feet wide. And then we also want to get rid of areas where the sight lines are bad. And that sometimes is just that there's a lot of zigzagging on the trail. Other times there are trees and other structures like fences that come way too close and actually interfere with sight lines. So we want to try to realign the trail to get rid of those potential conflict areas. But also, even more important, we want to put a parallel trail down. And this would really be for our pedestrian users, our walkers and bikers, would use this 4-foot wide crusher fine parallel trail. And it really does take the cycles, it separates the cyclists and the pedestrians. They have this in multiple other areas, but some of you may have used the Mary Carter Greenway Trail over in Littleton, and this is exactly what they have, a parallel. And I use it regularly, and you can see that it works because the pedestrians and runners always use that crusher fine trail. So it's much safer for everyone. And then lastly is this striping and signage to just improve the signage, the warnings, and also to do mid concrete striping so people stay on the right side of the road, if you will. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Nice job.
It wasn't 3 minutes, but close. Huh?
Close. Barely went over.
Thank you to my colleagues. I appreciate you joining me here at the podium tonight. And those are the big highlights. Can you imagine all the other details that go into the budget? It's really striking, particularly compared to that 15-pager that I handed out. I would like that back. Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Skilling. I will grab that. So many details go into the budget. And I think what might have struck you as you page through that, there was no discussion of how many patrol cars they were going to buy. There was no discussion of the council's vision or values or goals and so forth. We have all that in this budget, and I'm going to do some compliance really quick and just close it up, and we'll be available for questions, answers, and discussion. So we do have state law to comply with. We have that. The reserves are in compliance with the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights that require 3% for emergencies. We've got that, as you know. And then city charter has 3 requirements. We're taking care of 2 of them tonight, and we've got 1 to go, and that's the budget will be adopted by November 1st, and we will get that done in a timely way, not a problem, meeting all the requirements in the legal spectrum. Each year, and this will be the 20th year consecutive that the city has submitted its budget to the Government Finance Officers Association. This is a venerable organization over 100 years in existence, and I can tell you the criteria is over 10 pages long in order to receive the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, and we're confident that this 2020 budget, the way that it's outlined, will meet that criteria, and we will receive this for the 21st year. And this doesn't mean that the choices or the direction meets some spec or some guideline, but rather the amount of information, the way that it's communicated, the standards of presentation meet those requirements within the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. And a lot of effort goes in to do that. We want to make sure that we are meeting our core value of open and honest communication and, of course, fiscal responsibility and a number of other things. But I just want to take a moment to give thanks to you, Mayor and Council, for your work on the budget in advance. You still have some work to go, of course. I also want to thank our budget accountant, Carrie Murky, who really spends the majority of her year working on the budget. I want to thank all of our budget coordinators. We have over 30 of them in the various departments. It's an ongoing process. We're measuring, reevaluating, reallocating resources all of the time to meet the needs of the public, and those 30 people put in a lot of work. I also want to thank our print shop. These folks work hard to get these looking good and to you as fast as possible so that you can have as much time to read and enjoy, no doubt, all of the details that go in. And then I want to thank my colleagues on the leadership team. They're responsible ultimately for all of the proposals, all of the measurement, all of the outcomes in each of the various departments. So thank you to my colleagues on the leadership team. And with that, I just want to finish. I'll present the budget calendar here in a minute. But I want to talk just a second about the core values, because I started the talk tonight with sort of some high level, some might say platitudes. I like to say big picture. But no, I want to tell you how each and everything that we do connects to the core values. And if you want proof, you can look at pages 82 through 85. And you might say, what's going on with quality living environment? Well, there it is, page 85. We've got short-term and long-term goals. One of them, the Public Works Department writes about some initiatives that it is seeking to achieve in the Rooney Road Recycling Center. Now, you didn't see a slide on that tonight, but there's a little bit more detail as kind of what's happening, how it connects to quality living environment, and what we're doing to live up to it. And we've got goals under each of those core values. So take a gander at that, and be sure and read the city manager's budget message, because it too will describe activities happening related to your council goals and also these core community values. So with that, I've got the next steps on the calendar. I'm going to go ahead and take a seat behind the podium here. And Mayor and Council, that closes up the presentation. I will remind you that we do have Robert Smith on deck to talk about the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, but I think now is a time for questions, answers, and discussion on everything you've seen. Thank you.
Very well done, very thorough. So let's take a 10-minute break. It's 9:04, so let's come back at 9:15 if we might, and have some questions. I think we'll do probably all of them, so I don't know if the other folks want to join you down there when we come back, if that's easier. Well, okay. I just thought it'd be easier because you'll probably get questions from different parts. So, all right, we'll be back. All right, we're on. We will reconvene the Lakewood City Council's joint study session of September 16th at 9:15 p.m. Looks like Mr. Dorr is here, and so we'll get going. Mr. Beta.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to say I've got a really good idea how we could save some money in our budget, and that would be to turn down the air conditioning because I'm cold up here. So that's my first comment. Secondly, thank you for the presentation. That was awesome. Thank you for all those of you that have put a lot of time and effort into this budget. I've got several questions, but I think they're going to be better off addressed in written forms because they're kind of complicated rather than doing them here. So I'm going to pass on questions. Thank you. And I'll just send them out in written form, and it'll be easier for you to deal with them that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Beta. And I did want to echo that. I think just for everybody to know, this is our first blush. This has been out there. We still have 2 more public opportunities. And so I know a lot of questions have been asked and answered and continue to develop those. And we also have a public input portion tonight. I will make one quick observation in your opening remarks there, Mr. Dorr, your opening slides. There was another community that is actually at 0%, and they house one of the metro area's biggest malls, and that's Lone Tree. So that's interesting to see. We're up a tick, but a city like that with that huge economic drivers completely flat. Thought that was interesting. Mr. Abel.
I'll try to make it quick. Great presentations. I'm very impressed. Made notes of all the projects that, especially those that affect Ward 1. It's amazing what we're doing this year. So all across the city. A couple of concerns. One, when we started talking about the Tabor refund, we told folks that we would not be using the new Tabor revenue to cover costs that are usually covered by general fund or capital improvement fund, so that the Tabor funding would not be spent on the routine thing. Mr. Dorr mentioned that we have a lot. We seem to have a number of those. In fact, in this year's budget, we have money set aside from Tabor for the Wadsworth and Yale traffic signal. Last year, we had the same traffic signal, Wadsworth and Yale reconstruction. The money was going to come from grants in the the Capital Improvement Fund. So there we go. We have some projects that already had been scheduled to be paid for from other sources, and instead we're putting the Tabor fund in there to backfill other funds. I would rather see Tabor go to completely new things. The other concern is I heard nothing about a traffic management plan funding. Where are we on that? Is that not going to be part of next year's budget, or did I miss it?
So I think there's 2 questions.
I'm sorry, not traffic management, parking.
Parking. So there's the parking management funding, and then the first part of that was projects related to Tabor.
Thank you. I'll ask our deputy city manager to address the parking management RFP.
The RFP is currently out to bid. We have not received proposals back yet. That'll happen in a couple weeks. We'll just have to see what they come in at and whether those funds can be absorbed within the existing budget or what that might look like. I believe ultimately what you're asking is the city looking at creating a traffic enforcement division, and is that in the budget? And no, that's not in the budget. That's a much broader policy discussion that is going to have to involve council and probably many more steps in that process.
The parking management plan is high on the priorities of the community members I talk to. Is it possible that if we do move forward, after we get those bids in, it'll become a supplemental appropriation later in the year?
Absolutely. After we get those bids, we'll bring that back to you and talk about the funding thereof.
Okay. And then the other concern is backfilling projects that had already been scheduled with funding to come from other sources, backfilling that with Tabor money instead.
Yeah, thank you. Councilor Abel, there could be, maybe there's just a little bit of confusion on my part, but as I'm looking at page 26, the new projects, there are 3. There are sidewalks. There aren't any signals. So I think Mr. Hutchison was describing in his presentation projects that were approved from the Tabor funding for a year ago. And he went ahead and presented both years. So maybe I can go back to the slide. We can look at the one you're describing, but I think you said it was at Yale, and what was the intersection?
It's at Yale and,
Wadsworth.
Yale and Girton, and a traffic signal on Union in Florida. Both of those.
Yeah, Mr. Abel.
I'm sorry, in 2019 budget on page 516, it lists the traffic signal at Yale and Girton. Says it would be paid for with a grant from the Capital Improvement Fund. It's page 516 in the 2019 budget. Do you see that at the bottom? Do you have that budget in document?
Thank you, I do. Yes, I'm looking at that.
At the bottom of page 516, the left-hand side, traffic signal reconstruction on Wadsworth at Yale and Girton. The source was to be $250,000 from a grant from the Capital Improvement Fund, or a grant and the Capital Improvement Fund. You see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do see that. Thank you.
Okay, and on this year, on page 496 in the 2020 budget, near the top of the page, just above non-departmental, says traffic signal reconstruction on Wadsworth at Yale and Girton, 500 grand from Tabor. Do I have those confused?
Okay, I'm looking at that now. I beg your pardon.
Is that Tabor?
So I'm on page 496 in the 2020 budget.
Right.
I see traffic signal on Union in Florida, 500,000, right? And then right above that,
Yale and Girton.
Yale and Girton, 275,000 CIF / grant.
That's still CIF?
Right.
Okay.
It just took 2 lines in the publishing there, Councilor Abel. So I think that means that these 2 reconcile. Now, it did increase from 250 to 275. That is there, but no, those aren't backfilling then.
So we're not using any Tabor funds on projects that had already been planned, including, I also believe, the right-hand turn on Union, on Sims onto 6th Avenue that we were just talking about.
Uh-huh.
Wasn't that already in the discussion phase before we assigned money from Tabor for it?
Well, I can only go back as far as Resolution 2018-36, when it was described that all of the items on Resolution 2018-36 would only be funded if 2D was voted up in November 2018. Had 2D been voted down, none of those projects would have occurred. So I can tell you that.
Including that right-hand turn
Correct.
from Sims toward downtown.
Right. I don't think you'll find that in a prior capital improvement and preservation plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you. First, just want to thank everyone. I know others have said that, but it's such a tremendous amount of work, and I feel very good about taking this document back to Ward 5 and, discussing it and showing how it reflects their goals and priorities. So really appreciate that and want to just call out all the investment in the public safety. I'm hearing concerns about that, and I'm excited about the investments we're making there. Same thing with the sustainability, and then, of course, with the parks. I know we have a lot of residents that are going to be thrilled about that dual path system to reduce the conflicts between pedestrians and bicyclists. So thank you. Couple quick questions. My first question is also about Tabor, and I just was wondering, Larry, if you could, let me just redo that. I was wondering about page 117 and just trying to understand this page and being able for our community members to understand it as well, because yes, so if we could just get that page explained.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gutwein. Yes, at page 117, it looks different, no doubt, particularly for all of us who've been looking at pages like this for the many years. In fact, if you just look at the page to the left, 116, you see the open space fund, and it has many more lines filled in and more activities and a ongoing fund balance and all of that. And that's what we're mostly used to seeing. And the Tabor Fund, as it's presented, looks very, very different. Obviously, it has the revenue lines are all blanked out. You see a transfer in, but let me just go through the columns and rows. I think that's probably worth a few minutes because it is $20,614,190 that we're talking about here, that the citizens just voted on, 10 months ago. So let's see. I'm going to go a little bit out of order. I'm just going to follow the 2019 revised column for the moment, but I first want to talk about the row that reads transfers in $20,614,190. So for the election year on the ballot was $12,536,000. I'm going to round off by just a little. And that was voted on, and those funds were set aside pending the outcome of the election, $12,536,000. And that was for the year that had ended prior to the election. Then after the election, we closed up the books and audited them and did all the financial calculations, and an additional $8,152,000 would have otherwise been refunded, was retained by the city as required by the election. By 2D. And we will do this every year. We'll calculate the number until December 31st, 2025. So for December 31st, 18, it was an additional $8,152,000. If you add those two together, that's the transfer in, $20,614,000. That's where the Tabor Fund is starting, okay? Then above that, you see appropriations in community resources, $11,217,000. You see police, $2,422,000, public works, and so on. Non-departmental, we're taking care of the police agent health exams in the city's medical fund. That's where we're doing that. So it will leave a remaining $1,945,000. And then you see the appropriations in 2020 in the police department for $422,000. We don't anticipate any new money coming in, but of course, when we close the books in 2019, we will make the calculation. If funds are due, we'll transfer them in, and so on and so on. And then you see the remaining fund balances as they are. Now, you might wonder, wait a minute, Director Newland was talking about a process. She was talking about a very detailed process. It's underway at the moment to identify parks for open space. The recommendation here is that the council make an appropriation of those monies. However, none can be spent because anything $50,000 and greater requires approval of council. But a resolution would be quicker for the council to enact in order to capitalize on a piece of open space that might be readily available. Time is typically of the essence in these real estate transactions, so the money is appropriated, but we can't disperse any funds unless an authorization of council to acquire real property, which would only take a resolution, but council could do that at one meeting versus an ordinance with appropriations that would take 2 meetings. So that's the strategy that I recommend there. And then once these appropriations are made and the projects are ongoing and this fund is technically established, starting in January on Lakewood Ledger, which is the city's online transparency portal with all of our expenditures. We've been doing that since 2009. You'll be able to see all of those expenditures going out, all of the things that Chief McCaskey described, like tasers, and personal protection devices, and all of the different projects will be in the Tabor Fund. It'll just be one more drop-down menu. So thank you for the question, because the numbers are very large, particularly for the community, and are going to have a very meaningful impact. I just wanted to kind of describe the numbers. I hope that was
Yes,
useful.
That helps. Thank you so much. And then kind of a second question is, I wonder if, if the average citizen or resident wants to see where did the Tabor money go? Is kind of the question that we get. And if they don't necessarily know their way around this big document, it can be a little difficult, I think, for them to find exactly, even though it is all here, even though it's all accounted for. I'm wondering if maybe we could have just a kind of some highlights or some of those descriptions that we heard during the presentation of, major purchases that in each department, and parks and police and and sidewalks, if that could be listed on the Lakewood Together website, where people were kind of used to going during the Tabor question. I don't know if that would be worthwhile, but it's kind of would show that we did in fact spend the money exactly where we said we would, and it could maybe link to the more detail in the Lakewood Ledger, just so people have a rough idea that they can quickly see where that money went. And then my last question is just kind of this is a broad policy discussion at some point, but I just want to raise this, that, maybe during our next retreat, it might be worthwhile for us to talk about just how these changing economic shopping patterns are going to impact our economic development strategies moving forward. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Skilling, when you are ready, take your time.
I don't have necessarily a question, just a request. If Chief McCaskey's presentation, there was I think the first 1 or 2 slides had the breakdown of the dollars and the increases. If we could just we don't need the whole packet, but if you wouldn't mind emailing us just those particular slides. It's a little bit easier. I think in here, the police budget is 35 to 40 pages, and those tear-offs I think would be very helpful. It gave the breakdown of the increases and what expenditures they were using for the year. We get a ton of questions about that, about what the police are doing, where they're spending their money, and I think rather than direct people to this document, I think those tear-offs really tell the story. So if we could get that would be great. We don't necessarily need the pictures of the tanks or any of that, but just the numbers, unless we got a picture of Kathy driving the tank.
No, that's not that funny.
Okay.
So we have.
Thank you, Chief.
So we have the increase, the budget increase for 2019 that's going to the police department, and then the increased funds for 2020. Is that the number, or do you want specific expenditures?
I think it was just the slides that the chief was actually using during the presentation. I think it was right up front, his first couple, that actually had the numbers before we got into some of the detail, like the tasers and all of those. Okay. There's just a couple sheets I think that would just be helpful.
To that point, though, could we? I mean, I think the whole presentation and all the slides should be posted so people can have that opportunity to go through all of them.
Sure, I just, whatever's easiest, if it's,
The whole presentation will be posted online.
okay.
Go to our budget and audit chairman, Mr. LeBear.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to acknowledge, I want to say thanks. I'm proud and honored to have chaired the Budget and Audit Committee this year. And I wanted to thank our Budget and Audit Commission. I think we made a lot of great strides, and we spent a lot of time trying to better understand the budget, make recommendations. We were working to examine future needs, and we worked, I think, pretty diligently to make sure we were providing some oversight and really get an example of how the budget reflects the community's priorities. So I was pleased with all the contributions that have been made by all of our committee members, and just want to take some time to thank them for their service and acknowledge their increased activity we had this year. We had a lot of extra meetings. I'm sure some of you noticed. I just wanted to thank everyone for working so well together, and I look forward to hopefully continuing to be involved with the Budget and Audit Committee next year. But I also just want to acknowledge all of our people on the committee. So Councilor Karen Harrison, I want to thank you, and Councilor Mike Beta, then also our citizen representatives, which I put their last names right here so I would actually not mess it up, but it's John Ludwigson and Donald Tallman and Dave Wickman. So I just want to thank them for all of their hard work, and obviously our finance director as well. He put on a lot of great presentations, and we appreciate all the work him and his staff did to make the meetings enjoyable as much as you can whenever you're talking about finance and expenditures and whatnot. So I just wanted to take some time to thank all of you for that. And thank you.
Ms. Harrison?
Thank you. And I would also say fantastic job for you to make such a dry subject as the budget one of the most important things that we do as counselors, where I actually look forward to the meeting. That's great. Thank you so very much. All of you did a wonderful job. I just have one question, since we do know, and this may not be something we can answer right now, since we know that the shopping habits of the general public might be changing, let me put it that way, can we choose like one particular, I'm thinking of Amazon, and just track the increasing income that we see sales tax generating from Amazon as maybe a major indicator of what's happening? Or do you do that already? You probably do, knowing you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, definitely. We're looking at the Amazon company and their competitors. They have them. A lot of people forget, but we're taking a look at them as well in that whole sector. I think that the most telling time frame ahead is the holiday season. Spending patterns are very cyclical, but they're also seasonal, very, very seasonal. And so I think we'll know a little bit more as we look at the holiday shopping, and as we get into the first quarter of 2020, we'll have a little bit more information. According to the city code, the ordinance, information on a sales tax return is confidential. Reason being is competitive advantage and things like that. So we can't share publicly what's happening with a given company, or even two, because then if I share information on two companies, one company knows its data and can know the other company. So just due to competitive advantage and proprietary information, we can't quite go that public, but we can talk about sectors, we can talk about a trade area, we can talk about a geography, we can talk about industry. So we will continue to do that, and that's something that we're tracking very, very carefully to see how this changing pattern and so forth is taking shape. We've really just started to notice the change in probably the last 8 to 10 months. So with the holiday season ahead, that's one for us to really be taking a look at. And I know that our budget and audit board will be expecting a report from me in the first quarter after those holiday sales are tabulated. So as I said also in my presentation, it's very difficult to absolutely prove with indisputable evidence sort of what's happening. But I think when you start to accumulate all the little pieces, you can kind of make some sort of a conclusion. So stand by for more information. Okay.
Mr. LeBeer?
I also wanted to mention, I forgot to mention last time I spoke, the Budget and Audit Commission did request from our finance director to take a look at sales tax and, in revenue diversification and that sort of thing. So we are going to be taking a look at it just to kind of get a better idea of, how we might, watch out for the evolving sales tax situation. So I think that's something we are going to look at, and looking forward to having those discussions. I also had a quick question related to the Tabor money as it relates to public works and the construction contingency dollars. So it sounds like obviously those dollars are for if there are any contingencies, overruns, or something like that, and construction related expenditures on our 7 projects that we had from last year, I think, if I'm correct. What happens to that money if we don't need that contingency money?
Thank you. The contingency is related to all 7 projects. So that's the 4 from a year ago and the 3 for this year. And I think that's the right level of contingency given the construction that we're talking about. We're seeing cost escalation in materials and labor for construction that's just unlike anything else we've seen. So it's very prudent to have this contingency. But to answer your question, any unused dollars will have to be used for the purposes described in the election. And so Mr. Hutchison and his team will no doubt have other project opportunities, or that, maybe they can add or expand features for the given projects that are proposed. So stand by. It won't be, the funds can't be used for any other purpose. So that you can be sure of. And as they get a little bit deeper into the projects, Mr. Hutchison and his team will be able to come back to council in future study sessions to describe how the bids are coming and on. And he'll certainly have a better feel what with the existing sidewalk projects that the city is bidding on in the minute to understand those construction cost trends. We don't know if they'll continue to escalate, some of them near double-digit percentages, or if they might sort of moderate and we can maybe add one project to the list. But I would caution you not to get your hopes up for that. I think probably this contingency will find its way into those 7 projects along the way.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Right. All right. I just have one question and one last question, and that is looking to the future. We've talked a little bit about some big ticket items like the shops, and what else could be out there. I don't know if we really identify that. Certainly not in the 5-year, we don't. But if there's any signaling in here, or should there be in future budgets that says, we are coming up on a lifespan on these, just so it's out front, so the community is aware, so policymakers are aware that we need to be potentially having these conversations. Because that's a big one.
Sure, that's something that we absolutely can do. By way of a status on that, we're still seeking a location for the shops. And once we have a location identified, we'll have a better sense for what those costs are going to be for the campus. Ideally, as you know, we'd like to find at least 10 acres so that we can have a full operation, combination of some of the activities of parks as well as streets and fleet, et cetera. But if we're not able to find a site that large, then we're going to have to bifurcate. And so once we have a location identified, then we'll be able to get closer to what those costs are. We'll come to you, and then we'll talk about funding strategies. So this has not been an easy endeavor, and I know that we have staff working diligently on that, and we hope to have a recommendation in the future for you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that is it for this portion. I have a public input. I have Mr. Ball. You have signed up. So you want to come on down? 3 minutes, 2.5 green. There you go.
Hi, I'm Roger Ball. Oh, yeah, as you probably know, I'm going to be talking about stormwater drainage. Because I've looked at the budget. We got about $6 million appropriated for that. Out of that, $2.7 million is for major drainage projects. What I've heard, and I don't have the hard figures, that we have somewhere around $100 to $200 million worth of backlog. If you take simple division there, we're never going to get it done. You can't take the money from operating budgets and try and fund these long-term capital budgets. That's just not the way it works. Now, I got a hold of a presentation that was made to council back in September 2014, and they were talking about raising the stormwater fees, which was done, and then bonds could also be sold to provide revenue to build improvements more quickly. There was a concern about accelerating this process then. The bonds would be paid off by revenue generated by the stormwater management service charge. And they talked about about 110 improvement projects at that time. I don't know where we stand with that. Mr. Hutchinson mentioned about how these costs for construction are accelerating. You know, to put it off, we're just never going to get ahead of the ball here. So I'd really like to see us take a serious look at the bonds to help fund this endeavor, and also provide a little more transparency. What projects are there? What state are they in? How much has been spent? What needs to be done in the future? And see if we can get this on track. Because, as you know, we had somebody die this year in a stormwater tragedy in July. And so it's a public safety issue as well. And that, so I'm just helping to bring some ideas up so we can move forward on that. Thank you very much, and I ended before my 3 minutes, so.
You did, very nice, thank you.
I worked on it.
And you just gave us a great plug and preview for an upcoming study session where we'll be talking about one of our major drainage programs, projects, as well as funding for these sorts of things. So I think that's in the next 2 weeks, maybe?
I believe that's October 7th, North Dry Gulch.
So that'll begin that conversation for that particular project, which is our largest, but also we'll have that funding conversation as to how do we fund these sorts of things. That's it. Okay. So now we have the 2019 revised 2020 Lakewood Reinvestment Authority budget. Mr. Smith, come on down. Don't be shy.
I've been going to Toastmasters, so I'm over my shyness. So that's good.
Huh? No, not for this, because this is a joint session. Thank you, though.
Left button.
Not according to my agenda.
Thank you. I didn't realize it was at the end. Thank you so much.
If you want me to, we can.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Commissioners. We are now in the LRA portion of the meeting. We're taking a look at the budget that was provided. You might take a close look at it and notice it's a little different than the city budget in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is it has a different logo on the front of it because the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority is a separate unit of government than is the council. So really, at this point, we're taking a look at it from that point of view. Now. It's a relatively simple budget. We talked about it a few weeks ago in terms of the Urban Renewal Authority. The increment from the property taxes is the revenues that are on it, and then the expenditures are things that we do to mitigate blight in the various urban renewal areas. And there are 4 of them within the city, and they're all listed within that budget here. But I thought I'd take a look at one of our great success stories. One of our great success stories right off the bat, and that's the Alameda Streetscape project. Now, what you see on the screen right now is a conceptual drawing that you probably saw, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago was when this first came out. And you can take a look at it, and I would encourage you to look at the lower left of this. That's the gateway element that was supposed to be installed at Benton Street, which is fairly far east out on Alameda, close to Sheridan. We're going to just take a look real quick because we'll give you the real one. How do we do? It looks exactly like it was in the conceptual picture, which is somewhat of a rarity sometimes. So we're very excited about that. This is the project that is on the Alameda streetscape. We were able to blend in 3 different funds: capital improvement funds, funds from the Belmar folks, at the Starwood folks, and the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. Blended those funds together to create this incredible sort of experience that you have all the way from Sheridan all the way past Wadsworth into Carr as part of the Alameda streetscape project. What I'd like to point out to you is that the right-of-way along Alameda is incredibly wide, and a lot of that right-of-way was was brought about in the 1930s. Basically, just so you know. I want to give you that little piece of information. I also want to give you the piece of information where you're looking at that red stone that we used in the gateway elements along the way there. Anybody want to take a shot at why we did that? Red Rocks, that's right, because Alameda was slated to be the Grand Esplanade, the boulevard that would take you from Denver all the way to Denver's mountain parks. And again, we obtained that right of way in the 1930s. So if you think about it, 70 years in the last century, nearly 20 years in this century, and you folks were the folks that managed to get this job done. We have sidewalks all the way from Sheridan on both sides of the street. I don't know how you feel about patting each other on the back or giving high fives, but you were the folks that got this done after, and it didn't take us 100 years. It only took us a little fewer than 90, just so you know, to get this done all the way down the Alameda Esplanade. So let's take a look at some of the other parts of the project there. You can see the gateway element that's at Wadsworth and Alameda. You can see folks working on this. We wanted to bring this slide up here because part of the job of the Economic Development Office as well as the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority is to use jobs and capital investment and a rise in the tax base in order to create economic wealth and diversity in our community. And you see folks working there. And let me just tell you, these men and women know how to eat. I'm telling you that right now. So as they're pouring concrete all day long, they take a lunch break, and where do they go? Someplace in Lakewood, and they buy that Lakewood stuff. Friday afternoon club, they hang out here in Lakewood a little bit longer, and so a few of those dollars came in just because those people were employed throughout this entire process. I'll mention a little bit on the Teller Street. Teller Street is a street that runs north and south away from Alameda, and now we have a sidewalk on both sides of the street that goes all the way from O'Kane Park all the way up to the Belmar Shopping Center. And you can see that is developed right there, and that hill that you see on there, there was a retaining wall that was failing that we managed to get fixed up, and so that street looks tremendous. If you haven't had a chance to do that along the way, I'd recommend it. In fact, if I were you, I would go ahead, head out to the east on Alameda, get to Federal Boulevard, make a U-turn, turn around, and come back. And once you pass Sheridan, if you don't recognize that you're in a brand new community with a brand new sense of place, I don't know how else to do it. It's an amazing experience once you cross over the Sheridan line based on this entire project. All of it leads to downtown. As I mentioned, a very wide right-of-way. There's lots of landscaping, lots of trees were planted as part of this. The experience is supposed to be one where as you're walking along, you're feeling as though you are ambling through an urban garden landscape all the way from Sheridan to Wadsworth. And then thought I would mention a quick look ahead with the budget on here. The Station Betterment Program was something that the LRA approved several years back. We took out some bonds in order to make this happen. Those bonds were roughly 5% range, something along those lines here. We believe we're going to be able to refinance those in the next year or so, get that rate down and pay a lot less. So we're going to save the taxpayers money on a project that we already did. We used those dollars to improve the Lakewood Wadsworth station and the Oak Street station. Those improvements are already in place and folks are enjoying those, but we think we're going to be able to refinance there. We've got a couple of competitive offers. We're having our finance folks take a look at it, and I just got to do a tip of the hat to the finance folks for working with the banks to get some competitive offers, and we think we're going to be able to do that in the upcoming year. That concludes my presentation because we started at almost 10 o'clock, and so I didn't want to take too long to get that going. So with that, I will sit down. If you have any questions and whatnot, happy to answer any of those.
Ms. Vincent.
Very rare.
Very rarely do I make a comment, but I have had comments about the Teller Street sidewalk from people in that area, and they are thrilled with it. They said it was a great amendment, back and forth to school and the kids, and they're very, very tickled with it. So I wanted to let you know that.
Nice job.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, sir. I'll open public input. Nobody signed up. Seeing none, I'll close. Don't everybody get up at once. All right. Well, thank you. And you've done some really important projects. And the streetscape all along Alameda is absolutely beautiful and really adds a sense of place. It's unfortunate that you can't get to Red Rocks anymore on Alameda Parkway, but that's a whole nother foregone story. Okay, reports. No? Ms. Gutwein? Skilling?
Sure. I'd like to thank our very own Mayor Adam Paul and Ramey Johnson and Barb Franks for coming to our Ward 4 candidate forum. It was very well attended, and also thank you to Mr. Arlen, who was also there as well. But thank you all for coming, and it was a good discussion.
Thank you. Mr. LeBear? Mr. Abel? Ms. Harrison?
No report.
Nothing? Ms. Johnson?
No report.
Mr. Beta? No report. I was going to, but go ahead.
No report.
Okay, well, I'm going to go really fast. So busy weekend, lots of great events. Action Center celebrated their 50th or had a block party to help celebrate their 50th. And just a great turnout, lots of people there. But they did announce a new partnership with Red Rocks Community College to reopen their shelter and do some programming with students who are experiencing homelessness. So that's a really cool deal. Hats off to them. St. Rafka's had an incredible, fun Lebanese festival, great food. And then our Cops at Cook will be hanging out from 7 to 10 a.m. at the Clement Center on Friday. It's always a great experience. And they do a wonderful job cooking pancakes and sausage and great demonstrations. So that's all that I have. Ms. Millard? No?
I do have one thing I just wanted to reiterate. You saw the budget presentation this evening, and it really encompasses a lot of work by the staff here. And I just want to personally thank our finance director, Larry Dorr, for heading all of this up. He does a tremendous job. Also, Carrie Murky, who is the budget coordinator, that is one thankless job, and she does an amazing job with it. And I think Carrie's still here. There she is. Good. I hope I can embarrass her. She's very talented. And also thank you to all of the department representatives who serve on the budget team. It indeed takes a lot of work and over a long period of time, and they, as you can tell, do excellent work. So thank you to all of them.
All right. So it's 9:59. We will adjourn. Agent Bassett, thanks for being with us tonight. And we're done. Have a good night.